Mario Kart Wii is one of the top-selling video games of all time. It was originally released in 2008, so the models in this game are a bit old. And although it was these models and courses that really made this game shine, as well as the ultra shortcuts, they do have some secrets in them. So today we're going to take a look at Mario, his baby version, and all of his associated courses up close and personally. Next week we're going to take a look at Luigi's, but for now, this is Mario's model right here, and it sits at 667 tries and 1,032 edges. Now, this is a very well-rounded model, honestly, for the time, and especially for the game, because in Mario Kart, you're really not taking up-close and personal looks at these models as you're driving around the course. Not compared to a game like Mario Galaxy, where you're always forced to look at an up-close view of the model. And even though it does have a low try count, it doesn't really show that much, aside from the fists, which are always very blocky in these games. And funnily enough, they did not actually model the individual fingers, as there was never really a need, since they'd always be clasped around a handle or a steering wheel. We could take a look at his facial features here, and I want you to pay attention to some of these, like the mustache, the nose, the textures on the eyes and mouth, and the overall Mario hat. Although they're not super high polyed, you'll see in a second here, comparatively to the CPU's model, just how much better it really looks. But before that, we'll also take a look at his overall textures as well, and I really do like the wrinkling texture that they put right above the overalls, right on the shirt here. However, the buttons could use a little bit of work if I'm being honest. His shoes are nothing new, just the classic Mario brown clog-like shoes. But as we take a look at this model right here, the CPU version, we can really see there is a huge difference. I mean, those shoes we mentioned earlier are now just single triangles on the bottom, very spiky and pyramid-like on the toe of it, and the hands are a whole nother story, just being simple triangular prisms. And going back to what we said earlier, his face, his mustache, and his nose are all very slimmed down in this model here, as they wouldn't need to be super high poly if the racer is super far away. You'd barely even be able to tell on the Wii's native graphics. It's just a funny model, and every single character model has these, so hit that subscribe button if you want to see them, because we're going to be covering them all eventually. Now first, we got to take a look at Mario's circuit, and the main element to this is obviously Peach's castle. It's a very nice castle build, honestly. You gotta love the classic Peach window pane. You can take a look here at the roof as well, and Yoshi is not anywhere to be seen, which makes sense and also doesn't make sense, as if you played Super Mario 64, you know that Yoshi sits atop the roof. Take a look at it from the back too, you can see that there is no textures on the opposite side, so it makes it totally transparent if you see it from this angle, but there'd be no way to access this from the game, so there's no need for them to have textured it back here. Taking a look at the side though, you can see that there's a bridge that leads into a wall of nothingness. They didn't even texture a door. I don't really think you'd be able to see it, but there might have been a slight chance that if you just jumped off the course at the right angle, you'd be able to see it before you have to be brought back out of the water by Lakitu. You'll also notice here that these bridges are not connected island to island. There's one going from the castle to this island, and then one connecting these two islands, but there's a bridge that's kind of missing in the middle that should have connected all three of the elements together. Who knows why they didn't make it? It was probably just to save tries, but I mean, come on guys, just make it logistically make sense here. I mean, how are you supposed to get to these two islands out here? Taking a look at these trees too, you can tell that they are just 2D textures on a 2D plane, unlike this tree that's just slightly in front of them, which is a 3D model. It's interesting where they chose to optimize and where they didn't. I mean, I don't think it would, again, be very noticeable, but it's just weird that these island trees weren't modeled as well. It makes sense that the trees in the background had to be textured, but I guess it was just an optimization choice. Another choice they also made is on these little stars here on the actual fencing. You can see these stars right here on the actual lining of the track are 3D modeled, while the ones that are a little bit further in the distance are actually just 2D plain. They both look exactly the same, and I'd never even noticed this while I was playing the actual game myself, but taking a look up close here, it is obvious that that's what they did to optimize. We also have these Shy Guys and Hammer Bros sitting on the fence just cheering the race on, which is very awesome to see how they are modeled. A lot of care went into these models, obviously, even though you're just passing them by. It's funny though, they do repeat these models up a little bit further along the fence, and they do have a secondary model as well. I also like the little dancing animation that these guys have. It's very interesting how little work actually was needed to be done to make it a smooth and fun little dancing animation. I want to take a look at some of these houses in the back as well. The difference between these houses is that the ones at the front along the track line are actually fully textured, meaning they have windows, doors, and everything else that a house needs. But these ones in the back are selectively modeled, some only having windows, while the ones furthest away actually do not have anything. Now this would make sense if these were more Mushroom Kingdom utility buildings, but I have a feeling that these were meant to be houses and just wanted to save a little bit of data on the texturing of the doors and windows, so it is what it is. I mean, they're not very code compliant if they were to be living dwelling units, but who's to say what the code is in the Mushroom Kingdom. I also wanted to take a look at an interesting angle of this underpass here. You can really see what's going on underneath the hood, and taking a quick look through it too, it is awesome to see just what it looks like again, even though you can actually see this from the game. But what you can't see from the game is these little hills and this rainbow in the background. They're the classic Mario, weird looking pillar hills. I don't even know how to really describe them. They're not anything of this world, obviously. And this interesting rainbow texture that sort of just fades into the distance, obviously, and disappears before you'd ever really get to see it in the game. But now we can move on to the GameCube version of Mario Circuit, and again, we have Peach's Castle right in the middle. Instead of being off to the side, the whole course surrounds it this time. And because this was a GameCube track and they were trying to stay pretty close to what the GameCube had in store for it, it really is much lower on the poly count. I don't have the exact count here as it blended in with the whole course, but taking a look, it is a very different design, a much brighter, much more pinkish red than the previous one we just took a look at. And this one also has a star drawbridge for some reason. You'll notice that this one's actually up too, so you wouldn't be able to access Peach's Castle this time. Not that it matters, because they kind of have a bunch of shrubbery covering the entrance anyway. Atop Peach's Castle too, we can also see this Mario flag. There's a lot more texture work that was done on this than I'd say need be, since it's so far away from the general view of every racer, but you know, you gotta commend them on their detailing. The stars on the castle too, interestingly, although they are fully modeled, have eye models on the front and back. I don't know if this is a standard thing for all the stars in Mario, but it is interesting to see that they have eyes in the back of their head as well. We can also take a quick look at some of these sponsors for the racetrack. We have Koopa Karts, Mario Racing, we also have Super Mushroom, and we have Shoot, which seems to be just a red shell manufacturer, but I thought that red shells were just the shells of living Koopas, but you know, who knows. These sponsors line this whole section of track right here. Not the full track, but a quite large portion of it. We also have this Mario Kart logo on this blue shell up here. I don't know if this is supposed to be a light pole or what, but you can tell just how low poly this is, and the I and A in Mario and Kart are missing a little bit of green in their actual lettering, something you wouldn't notice from anywhere else but this up close distance. We also have some mushrooms in the back that don't actually connect to anything and are just floating free base in the sky here. I do like these textures, but I'm used to the bottom of these mushrooms actually having a little bit of white on the bottom. I guess it's not necessary, but if you want to stick to a true mushroom, then I guess it should have it. Another thing here is the water texture actually goes way further out than just the boundaries of this pond here. It doesn't just disappear or get cut off. It's more like a single plane that they used and didn't want to crop at all to save a little bit of a poly count maybe, who knows. I would even argue that the water looks better than the previous Mario Circuit we took a look at here if you remember, but it is what it is. Another interesting detail that I didn't notice while ever playing this game but is obviously there are these little eyes that are on the flowers here. You also see them on these trees, but the flowers are a lot less obvious. They also have a strange looking waffle pattern in the middle, so who knows if these things are edible or not. We also have the baby Mario model here, and it's very close in poly count to Mario actually, even though it's much smaller. It contains 655 tries and 1009 edges, so just slightly below. Again, the hands are made into fists, and they're very blocky. The nose, however, is actually a little bit better modeled than Mario's nose, and I think this is because, you know, baby Mario's nose is such a big part of his face that it really needs to be. Although pixelated as well, the eyebrows, eyes, and mouth texture are pretty decent looking on this guy. And interestingly, his hat doesn't fit perfectly around his head. This makes sense as he eventually does grow into it, but you can see there is definitely a gap in between his head and the inside of the hat. He's also got a big round belly for a baby, and I don't know if this is because he's been overfed or if he's got a diaper on, but who knows. It definitely sticks out a lot more than Mario's. And unlike Mario's overalls, these actually don't have pant legs, and you can just see the bare legs that run down to these shoes. But unlike Mario's shoes, these are actually light blue shoes with a white sole, so they do have a little bit of differentiation. And something interesting actually on this model that you cannot really see unless you were to, you know, take an up close look at the model like this, is that baby Mario's texture atlas is actually on the top of his legs right here. If you take a look inside the belly, you can actually see that to be the case, as the entire texture atlas is right there. This is an error that no one would have really caught even if they were test driving the game at all, because it cannot be seen outside of a model viewer like this. Again, we also have this model from the CPU's perspective, and it is very low poly as well, but looks a little cleaner than Mario's, honestly, as his shoes are actually bricks instead of just triangles, but his hands are still those prism-esque triangles. And where Mario's nose was in a diamond orientation, Baby Mario's is actually in a squared orientation, which is interesting. His hat does look a lot better than normal Mario's though, but there might actually be a bit more pixels in the hat's M texture. Now let's move on to Mario Circuit 3 from the SNES. This one is a very simple course, honestly, so there's not too much to talk about aside from the background textures, like these trees that actually go a little bit below the course line here if you take a look. And interestingly, I always thought these clouds were a part of the background here, but no, they are actually different. They hover just slightly in front of the actual background texture here. But again, it is very simple. I mean, these mountains are just very, very seldomly textured, and the sky is literally just a yellow background as it's trying to capture that basic NES nostalgic vibe. However, we can take a look at it from an aerial view and just see how similarly matched it is to the actual original NES version of the course. I'll put them side by side here so you can take a quick peek at it for yourself, but it is very cool to see just how it evolved over time. Like I said here, although it is an interesting course, there's not much to look at, so we can move on to Mario Raceway from the N64. And the first thing I want to take a look at, obviously, is the stands. We have a ton of fans in the stands, ranging from Toads to Goombas, some Shy Guys, and even some Birdos in here. There's a few others as well, but you can see there is a contrast between the actual textures of the characters and the background of just the colored spots that make up the rest of the stands here. Interestingly too, you can also see a little bit of a chair behind some of these guys here too, a light blue chair I should add. But to top it all off, literally, there is a ginormous Mario hat up top, and comparing it to the actual Mario model, you can see that there is a lot more tries on the stands version of the Mario hat, as it should be since it's going to be a much larger, much more visible model. We also have this Mario Go sign in the distance here, and something that's interesting is that one half of it is fully modeled around each border, but the other half is actually missing a little bit of the model. As it spins here, you can kind of see that at the bottom there is a very small gap in between the bottom border and sign, but on the other side it's not there and is fully modeled. It's an interesting little thing that you would never notice outside of this video, but it's obviously there. We also have these Yoshi signs that are modeled on the back, and I think that's because you could possibly see this in the game if you drove up far enough, but something that you wouldn't see is this Mario Racing sign. You would never see this from the back, but because I think it borrows the exact same sign model, they just decided to sacrifice some polys to save some time on it. But as you can see here from the back, it is modeled. The same also goes for these shoot red shell signs in the distance here. Every single one has polys on the back. What's not modeled, however, is the whole entire brick sideline here. There is a ginormous gap that is obviously not seen in the front, but is very visible in the back. Just another creative way to optimize some of the gameplay here and make everything run smoother. And finally, we can take a look at the big green pipe that you can drive and trick through while you're racing. And the biggest question I had on my mind was this thing modeled all the way around, or did they cut it off right under the track here? So let's take a look at that now, and yes, they did cut it off. Perfectly makes sense as they went the extra mile to optimize every point of this game. But interestingly, it does actually go a little bit lower than the actual grass on the track. It's kind of hard to tell, but as I go up and down here, you can really actually see it. And it's not much, but it is enough for me to point out here. We can also take one last aerial view of this course too, and just to see everything in totality, almost like a kid's toy racetrack, is very interesting to see here. You get bits and pieces in the intro, but not nearly from this angle here, where it really shows off the entirety of the flat track. And although we don't live on a flat earth with a glass dome, Mario sure does. Last week we took a look at Mario's models and courses from Mario Kart Wii. This week we're going to focus in on Luigi and his courses. We have quite a few secrets to look at today, but to start off, we're going to look at Luigi's model. This model sits at 647 tries and 1,003 edges. Now, comparing his model to Mario's from last week, you can obviously tell that there's a lot of similarities between the two. Obviously, they are brothers, so they're going to share similar appearances, but one of the main things that sticks out is Luigi's nose is actually slightly bigger than Mario. It does look like they share the exact same nose, but I think Luigi's is slightly bigger proportionally to his face. Another thing that's interesting about Luigi is his face is slimmer. He is the taller and slimmer brother, so it makes sense. But unlike Mario, he has a clean sweeping arch mustache, meaning he doesn't have the individual bumps that Mario's has. Again, like all the models in this game, Luigi's fists are balled up and ready to clasp a wheel or handlebar, and he shares the exact same shoe models as Mario. The only main differences here are obviously his facial phenotype, his darker blue overalls, and his green clothes instead of red. He does share the similar hair bumps on the back of his head too, just like Mario, and as well as sharing the hair bumps, he also has the low poly computer model, so let's take a look at that now. This is very similar to Mario's CPU model with the exact same triangular hands and feet, the same body style, with just different textures for Luigi, being the dark blue overalls with green shirt. If you take a look at his face here too, he also has the diamond nose that Mario had, and a very sharp mustache, almost Waluigi-like, but still with a little bit more volume than Waluigi's has. We can take a look under the mustache too and see this weird lip texture, honestly. I am not too comfortable looking at this for too long, so let's pay more attention to his eyes. And again, these are very pixelated textures, and honestly they don't need any more than this as they're seen from a very far distance, if even that. Something interesting though is that the back of his hair is a straight line, doesn't have the bumps, but if you look at the underside of the hair, it's actually more of a green hue. I don't know why they did this, and honestly it seems more like an error than a design choice, but you can tell here just by the contrast of it that it is more green than the back of the hair. I also believe they use the exact same hat model as well, while just switching out the colors and the L texture on the front, and it is a very, very low textured, very pixelated L on his cap, similar to Mario's from last week. Now that we've got Luigi's model out of the way, let's take a look at his courses. This is Luigi's circuit. The first thing we gotta take a look at in this course is obviously the ginormous stadium seating. There's multiple examples of stands in Mario Kart Wii, but this one is very, very giant. It covers about a quarter of the track and surrounds the entire final turn of the circuit. Taking a look at the crowd here, you can see that there is a bunch of spectators. Shy Guys, Toads, Goombas, and something that we haven't seen before in the previous episode, which is the Miis in the stands. Now these Miis are always the same for anyone playing, no matter what Miis you have previously made on your console. They are just cookie cutter basic Miis, and I know that because I haven't made any Miis on this console yet. To top it all off, we have some Nintendo billboards and this ginormous Luigi's cap. It looks like a very similar model to Mario's as well, again, just being retextured. But interestingly, unlike Mario's from Mario's Raceway, this Luigi cap is actually not modeled on the back to save on some tries. Also, the supports are not directly connected to the stands as well, just sort of floating above the track. They are out of the line of sight, so it doesn't really matter, but it is an important detail that I have to mention. We also have this Luigi circuit sign here that rotates on its axis. Interestingly, this is a very high definition texture. As you can see, there's a ton of pixel work on this, and it's a very, very smooth texture, illustrating Luigi perfectly. It's interesting as it's kind of seen from a far distance comparatively to the track, but it was very well done. We also have these Mii spectators on the ground here, sort of in the pit area, I'd say. And the interesting thing about these Miis is they actually billboard towards the player, so they'll always be facing towards the player. But something that you can't see in the base game is what they look like from the side. They're sort of doing this opposite of the Michael Jackson leaning backwards, and they're sort of just heads floating on these weird Waluigi L-like structures. They do sort of give a 3D appearance in the game, but from this angle it is very apparent that they are not 3D at all and are just simple textures that are bent and modeled in weird ways. They're also not textured from the back too, so if you did have a way to manipulate the game and make it think that you actually weren't in front of them, you just wouldn't see these Miis at all. We also have this beautiful model of the cheap hot air balloon. It's also got these propellers on the side acting as the motor to make it go straight and allow it for turning as well, but it is on a track path anyway, so realistically those propellers don't do anything. I do like the lines on the model though, illustrating that this was based off a hot air balloon and it wasn't just a stolen cheap model that was undoctored. We also have the giant Luigi statue that pops out of this very small pipe. I don't know the logistics on how Luigi's supposed to pop out of that pipe realistically, but interestingly it does use Luigi's actual model and is just a giant upscaled version of it with a little bit of a shine on it, as you can see. It is pretty low poly for the size, honestly, but I know they probably didn't want to spend too many polys on this model, especially with all the other details that are around this course. But it is passing, and especially in the Wii's native resolution, you really wouldn't be able to tell. I also wanted to take a quick look at this mushroom in the distance here. It just bugged me how the white of the mushroom is on the exact same plane as the red cap. There are mushrooms that are like this, but the Mushroom Kingdom is well known for its stems being a little bit or much thinner than the actual mushroom head, so I just had to point that out real quick. We also have the pits here, here with the Mario Kart, Shooting Star, Luigi's tires, and Luigi's circuit billboards on them. They sit atop this very office-like sort of building, but is most likely where the commentators would sit if that was a thing, or the team spotters. We also again have these pillars in the back that often appear in Mario games, and especially Mario Kart. The difference here between Mario Circuit though and Luigi Circuit is these aren't just 2D textures, these are 3D models with textures on them. As you can see from the back, they actually don't have textures on the inside, which makes sense and saves data, but they definitely are more 3D than the Mario Circuit ones, which is interesting. We also have Chain Chomp Roulette here, and the reason that I chose this and associated it with Luigi is because, well, Luigi only has one course in Mario named directly after him, and I think if anyone deserves Chain Chomp Roulette, it's the casino dealer Luigi. For anyone that's unaware, I'll go over this quickly. Luigi has a minigame in Super Mario 64 DS where he acts as sort of this poker dealer. I'm not a gambler, so I don't know if that's exactly what this game is, and is adorned in a very stylish green suit. But that's besides the point for right now. We're focusing on Chain Chomp Roulette. And one of the interesting things that I had to take a look at in this level was the aquarium, which sits just behind the actual stadium. There is a ton of detail and texture work done in this aquarium. There's lily pads and other aquatic life all over here. There's also some pipes that poke out of the ceiling as well that are barely visible from the window, but can truly be seen, so it's not a waste of a model. But what's funny, and something I didn't realize, is these ginormous eels, which I might add are pretty intimidating when up this close and personal, actually don't surround the entire track the whole time. They have a specific track line that they go along, and once they are out of sight of the glass windows, they just fully disappear. They then go back to the start of their track and repeat the cycle over and over again, infinitely, or as long as the battle lasts. I kind of assumed that these guys just continuously rotated along the track and never reset, but no, they disappear and reappear at the start and end. There's also these simple fish textures that sort of line the walls as well, which I guess theoretically and logistically would keep these eels fed. We also have this ginormously, very well polyed Chain Chomp model. It's a very round model, honestly, but it does have to be since it's a ginormous focal point of this actual level. Taking a look from the inside, the black sphere part is not textured, but the teeth actually are. It's kind of hard to see, but as I try to track the inside of it, you can kind of tell. We also have these very simplistic spotlight models all around the track and coming from the top of the track as well. These ones are only 6-sided hexagons, but they do have a circular light texture in the center, so it makes up for it. We also have these billboards along the top with palm trees sitting right behind them. Some say danger, danger with a Chain Chomp barking it out, and the others say aquarium with a Chain Chomp in the center. There's also this awesome looking neon surrounding sign that just sort of cycles through Mario Battle, but it really does add to the atmosphere of this, and I don't think this level would be the exact same without it. The detail on this battle circuit is absolutely astonishing, and I love it a lot. There's tons of work and heart that went into this, obviously, and it makes for one of my favorite battle courses, hands down. Before we move on to the last course though, we also have Baby Luigi's model here. This model sits at 655 tries and 1,009 edges, so actually more than Luigi's model this time. Previously, Baby Mario's model had less tries and edges than Mario's full model, but this Baby Luigi model actually trumps Luigi's. Just barely, but technically it does. A lot of assets are borrowed from Mario's model, as you can tell. The arms, the balled up fists, the round belly, and the legs that go down to these green shoes this time, which actually match his color scheme instead of the blue that didn't match Mario's red shirt. And I think they sort of used a similar hat model, although they did change it up just a bit. Obviously, they also added the L on the front of the cap as well. And just like Baby Mario, Luigi's cap also doesn't perfectly fit his head, as he will grow into it. But you can see visibly here the large gap, honestly, much larger than previous, between Luigi's head and the cap. He also has those simplistic, fully blacked out eye models and very thin but sharp eyebrows. His nose is also ginormous, which makes sense as it's the centerpiece to this model here. Again, we also have the low polyed version, the computer version of Baby Luigi's model. It has the simplified hat, the square nose, and the much smaller textures. Interestingly though, the actual mouth texture is pink this time instead of the black that was on the normal Luigi model. Who knows why they made this choice, and I mean it doesn't really follow since, you know, the original mouth is fully black, but I guess it was the design choice. Or maybe it was someone else who was working on these low poly models and just forgot about that mouth texture on the first model. He also has his triangular hands, his low poly belly, and the leg models that are almost definitely borrowed from Baby Mario. The legs on the inside are not modeled at all, and neither is the bottom of the model, as these would be pressed up against a bike in this case, since this is the bike CPU model, and would never be seen, especially since it's already so far away when this model is brought in to replace the original model. Now for the final course, we have Game Boy Advance's Shy Guy Beach. Honestly, this course doesn't really fit too much with Luigi, but I have all of the previous courses already mapped out to other characters that'll be done in the future, so I wanted to make sure that this course was assigned to someone at least. I could have assigned it with Koopa, but we already have a ton of courses for him, so we're going to assign this to Luigi. There are two types of trees in this course. One 3D modeled here with the round coconuts, flat planed leaves, and obviously the trunk. The secondary one is actually a part of the background here, and is just a flat texture already on the outer dome of the course. It's the exact same phenotype, but it's just a flat model that sits in front of these clouds here. There are also these shaded ones, but those are pretty much the exact same. This course has some interesting clouds though, almost looking sort of mountainous instead of actual clouds. It's an interesting choice, but it does also add to the course's sort of aesthetic. We have these cute little crab models here, and interestingly, they have a little either error or design choice in the teeth. The center tooth sort of has a gold outline. I don't know if this is meant to be sort of a golden tooth, or if this was just a pixelated error that slipped through the cracks, but it is there. The eyes are also super low definition too. You can see the pixels obviously blending in. And to top it all off, he has those constant clicking claws as he's moving back and forth that are nearly the same size as his entire body, so logistically, I don't know how well this crab survives. But you get the cards you're dealt, I guess. We also have this flat texture of the sun too, but something interesting is this sun texture is actually on a lower plane than the water here. As you can see as I adjust the camera, the sun actually slips beneath the water. I guess it makes sense as the background also does too, but since this isn't part of the background and is a sole floating texture map, it's kind of funny that they made this choice. Who knows if they even made the choice? Maybe they just didn't even know that it was on a separate plane, as there's probably no reason to ever look at the sun from this angle, but we're doing it now. And finally, we have the Piste de Résistance, the Shy Guy's pirate ship. Now in the Game Boy Advance game, this was just a 2D texture, but in Mario Kart Wii, they decided to go all out and make it a 3D model. It's a very interesting pirate ship that is actually modeled all the way around, even the parts you'd never see. They do save some polys here and there, and honestly, with such a simple course, I feel like they maybe could have added a few more details, but since it's always so far away, it really doesn't matter how little detailing it really has. The only things that are just 2D textures on this are the actual Shy Guys, which is kind of funny considering they already had previously made 3D Shy Guy models, and obviously the sail, which would always be a 2D texture anyway. The cannons are also just simple hexagons that fire out these cannons here, and the cannons actually stay the same size the whole time. They don't scale down and then scale back up once they get closer to the course. They're always the exact same poly count. It's hard to see in an instance, but if I slow down the footage here, you can actually tell. Another interesting thing is the explosion also billboards as well. It follows the player camera and stays exactly in line with it. But if we take a look from a separate angle, you can see that they're just 2D textures as well. There is about 12 bursts of these little smoke piles surrounded by an actual modeled explosion. But honestly, in game, it does look really good, so I gotta commend it to them. They used very little resources to make a very effective explosion model. In Mario Kart Wii, Peach has some interesting courses and secrets relating to her. From Peach Beach, to Peach's Garden, to even her own model. There is a ton of interesting stuff to see with regards to Peach. Today we're going to be taking a look at some of her courses, her models, and the secrets that they both hold within. Now, the interesting thing about Peach is she has two different models for the same character. One in a biking tracksuit and one in her classic Princess Peach gown. They're both similar in tries and edges, but if you had to guess, what do you think would hold the most polys? If you guessed it was normal Peach, you'd actually be wrong, because this model sits at 769 tries and 1,211 edges, while the biker Peach model actually sits at 982 tries and 1,519 edges. It's interesting to me because obviously the dress is a lot larger, but truly that detail can be achieved with far less polys. Taking a look at both of them, they both have the exact same head model, with the same textured face, and interestingly, they also have these ginormous diamond earrings, I'd assume, which are completely prismatic. Honestly, I never really noticed this. I completely thought that they would be a little bit more detailed, but no, they are very, very sharp. She's got much thinner arms than Mario's or Luigi's that we previously looked at, with the classic balled up fist at the end for driving, and both models actually have this pendant right on the chest here. Something I noticed while looking at the pendant is Peach's chest model on her dress uses way less triangles than on the biker uniform. It's funny looking at it now, but I now realize that they definitely put a little bit more effort into the, I guess you could say, shape of Peach when they were designing the biker outfit. We also have a key difference in the shoes here. On the biker Peach outfit, she's actually wearing more of a squared off biker heel, where normal Peach is actually wearing a very sharp, bright red heel. Overall, both models look pretty decent. They put enough work into it to make a proper Princess Peach model, but I'd be remiss if I didn't give the Goon Squad a second to peek at the back. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's move on to the low poly models. These models are very silly in my opinion and almost could have been DS models, but they are in Wii. The faces are very pixelated, the crowns are not fully transparent at the top, actually including the black squares where the empty space would be normally on these crowns. And the earrings are just 3D triangles at this point. They've lost about half of their total polys from before. The bodies are also very slimmed down on these models as well, and they both retain those very triangular hands and feet. Something I didn't notice before though is that these models actually don't have any necks. If you look in the space between their heads and their collars, they actually have nothing connecting, meaning that they're just free floating, constantly hovering above the neck hole. Taking a look at Princess Peach's dress too, you can see it is a very silly looking dress in this format. Since it's sat down, there really isn't too much reason to model anything underneath, but having this view where we can see just how flat it is very funny to me. Now that we've taken a look at Peach's models, we can move on to GameCube's Peach Beach. And one of the first things I notice in this level is that the Piantas actually don't spawn in until they're within the view of the actual player. You can see here as I back up with Princess Peach's car, the Piantas actually spawn in individually and as a group. I also like to point out just how cute this little dancing animation of the Piantas is. Even though they're pretty low poly and low definition, it still shows that they put a good amount of effort into these little dance animations. We also have this ginormous Pianta superhero statue in the middle, and something that's funny is that they've now used this statue to hold up the rest of the flags that decorate this course. In both hands you can see he's holding these poles that actually lead out to a bunch of lines with flags on them. We'll also take a look at these buildings here too. A lot of them are cookie cutter and reused, but looking from behind just gives a whole new perspective on this course. I mean, I really thought that this was a heavily and densely packed city, but no, it's not. It's obviously just very subtle with the way they use the buildings, not adding too many, but having just enough to make it look good while keeping the level perfectly balanced and optimized. Something interesting too is this reflection glare screen that actually follows Peach. You can see as I accelerate here, it actually follows. Obviously we're zoomed out quite a bit away, so you can't really see Peach, but you definitely can see this glare screen move back and forth. I guess this was done to add a little bit more beachy glare and resistance to the level, but when taking a look at it from far, it's kind of strange to just see this ginormous screen covering the entirety of the field of view. We also have this sunshine yacht here, and something interesting is that the actual front and back are both modeled, but as you can see, the sunshine logo is flipped on the back of this cruise ship here. Since it's never seen, I guess they really didn't care to fix it, but it is funny to see that they went through the effort of modeling the back, but not flipping the actual sunshine logo. Interestingly too, this can also be seen on Daisy's yacht. The logo on Daisy's yacht actually was kept flipped, so both sides do read properly, but with the sunshine yacht, I guess they decided that they didn't have enough time. We can also take a look at these models that spawn in once you are close enough to the ship as well. We have the Shy Guys, Hammer Bros, Goombas, and Toads all getting along and witnessing a pretty dope race. Heading back to Daisy's yacht for just a second too. Taking a look at the deck, you can see that there is absolutely no detail from the Daisy Cruiser course, which this yacht is obviously based off of. The only thing that does remain is this little exit pipe that actually connects to the basement of Daisy's Cruiser, but in this game does not connect to anything. As we take a look in the inside of it, there is absolutely nothing going on. Interestingly too, unlike the flags on the previous Sunshine ship, this one actually just uses window textures to connect the top of the ship together. It's funny to see how they recycled these textures, and you wouldn't notice this from quite a far distance, but it is obvious once you get up close that these definitely were just reused window textures. We can also take a look at this strange mountain here. For anyone not aware, this has been a classic point of discussion regarding the Peach's Beach course. People seem to think this has an odd appearance, and I tend to agree. I mean, if you look at it, it is very, very sussly shaped. shaped. Maybe this is Peach's homage to Mario for saving her so many times, or maybe this is the way the mountain naturally formed, but it definitely is very oddly shaped. This was always one of my favorite courses though, and the level of detail just goes to show why. I can definitely understand why they went ahead and brought this course back into Mario Kart Wii, and also subsequent future games as well. But next we're gonna move on to Moo Moo Meadows. Now this course could have easily gone with a few other characters, but I decided that Peach fits this very well, because this track is a beautiful and bliss track. Not too many obstacles, not too much danger aside from some cows and some of these moles, so it fits perfectly. One thing I noticed right away though is just how empty the center of Moo Moo Meadows actually is. There's barely any detail aside from a few shrubs, this Moo Moo Meadow sign, and a few cows as well. Interestingly, some of these cows actually are 3D modeled, while others are just 2D textures. It's funny too because some of these cows are basically the exact same distance from the track, but some have a lot more care and detail put into them. I don't know why they went ahead and did this for some and not others. Interestingly too, we also have two versions of these barns right here. One that is 3D modeled. This is very close to the track, so this makes sense. And then one that's very far away in the distance that is just a 2D texture. Funnily enough, this barn actually is hovering off the ground here. I could never even tell this from playing the game, but once you get up close and personal with it, you can definitely tell that it's got a little bit of magic. We also have another very suspect windmill here. Again, I don't know what it is with these weird shapes in Mario games, but they decided to go with this very strange shafted windmill with a very unfortunate dome at the top to cap it off. From far away though, what's interesting is that the windmill actually doesn't appear, and it just appears as this building, which is one of the reasons I was able to tell just how strange this building looked. If the windmill had always been rendered in and always spun, I might not have ever noticed it. We also have this cow pen right next to it, and every single cow in here is just a 2D texture, so it is good to see some consistency. Interestingly too, some of these things in the distance, like the ravine and the road, actually go a little bit further than you might expect. For example, this road that goes over the bridge, although you can never see it while actually playing the track, and I tested from this angle here, actually goes completely over the bridge and isn't cut out at all. They don't get rid of polys to save some data, they just let it go right over. What's also interesting about these roads is that they do actually hover above the grass here. They're not attached to it at all. I don't know what it is about this course and hovering, but there does seem to be quite a bit of it. This ravine also goes a lot further than you'd expect to, only being cut off finally by this sort of hill that covers up the actual source of where the river starts. We also have these moles too that pop out of the ground, and you might be wondering, do these moles actually have a model underneath the ground? Well, if we take a look, they actually do. They load in quite a while before they actually truly pop out, but the second that they go back underground, they disappear entirely. This is definitely a cool secret that you'd never be able to see in the actual game. Before we move on to the last track, we also gotta look at Baby Peach's model, which sits at 854 tries and 1,409 edges. Now this definitely has a very similar body style to Mario and Luigi, but the crown is absolutely ginormous comparing it to the normal Peach model. It also has quite a bit more work done to it too, with the actual 3D gems on the crown. The normal Peach model only used textures to illustrate this, but the Baby Peach model uses real 3D assets. Something interesting about Baby Peach too is that her nose is almost invisible entirely. You can only really see it from this side view right here. Again, like Baby Mario and Luigi, she has that wide baby belly with the thin arms and the very strange looking legs. However, she does have the bright red shoes that normal Peach has. Aside from the style of shoe, this is the only time that a baby model actually contains the exact same shoe color as her adult predecessor, aside from Princess Daisy. We also have Baby Peach's low poly model, and this is an extremely low poly model, as you see here. Every single asset is incredibly dumbed down for the computer's model here, and as you can see, the Soother actually has this giant black triangle that surrounds the texture for the actual base of it. It's very funny to see, but honestly, it is a lot better done than some of the other low poly models. I mean, it still resembles the exact same proportions as Baby Peach, and the hands and feet do have a little bit more detail than normal Peach's low poly models. Her face, however, is extremely low definition, with barely legible eyes, 5 pixels for the cheek, and almost no other detail on it entirely. The furls of her dress too are also not transparent and are just represented by these black splotches, but this definitely is a very funny low poly model. Finally, we have Peach's garden, and the first thing I wanted to take a look at up close is the Mario hedge. Now, taking a look at this model, it really reminds you how much Peach admires admires Mario. I mean, you definitely have to go out of your way to have someone commissioned to carve up this statue in Mario's image. Although it isn't a great image and it is kind of a little poorly done, it is definitely supposed to be Mario. We can also take a look at the Chain Chomp playground here, is what I'd like to refer to it as. Seeing this from an aerial view is just very funny to watch them dawdle back and forth, and makes them seem a lot less threatening than they really appear to be in-game. Interestingly though, the backside of it, which you'd never see in-game, actually isn't modeled. Just like Mario Raceway, they leave a huge gap in between the hedge and the ground. What's interesting though is that they chose to keep the hedge and not the bricks, so you do have the back end of the hedges fully rendered in while the bricks totally disappear. We also have some more examples of the moles popping out of the ground here, and when you are far enough away, the mole models actually don't render in, but what does render in is these little textures of puffed dirt. It's interesting that these never stop, but the mole models do. It makes sense as the mole models take a lot more data and processing since they are 3D models moving instead of just a simple puff of dirt. But the second you drive up close though, you can see that they have the exact same formatting as the ones from Moo Moo Meadow, appearing underground and then disappearing immediately after popping back underneath. We also have this ginormous Peach castle as well. I don't really know if this is a castle or just another part of the garden, but it is absolutely ginormous and it spans the whole entire length of the course. From the back though, as you could imagine, it is not modeled at all and is completely transparent from the other side. This is something I completely expected at this point, but it is interesting to see what it looks like from the other side. You can also see that there's a ginormous trapezoid of missing ground. So theoretically, if you were to get behind this thing in game, you just see this ginormous void behind the castle. One more thing too that I noticed is before you go to the finish line, there is actually a bricked over path. Behind this arrow right here, you can see this entire path that was never used. This was probably just meant to keep the symmetry of the course, but it's very obvious that it is there now. I never noticed this until going into the model viewer, but it's very interesting to see. It's also completely transparent too, so you can see the actual mini-map that I have hidden behind every other asset on this road act. This is something you'd never notice because in the normal game, obviously, the map and timer are all on the front layer, but since I have to hide it for the video, you can actually tell that it is completely transparent and allows the pass-through of the actual heads-up display. This is another beautiful course though, and I really do love how they made sure that every one of Peach's courses really had the heart and soul put into it. It perfectly fits her vibe, and I do really appreciate these courses. Yoshi is one of Mario's closest allies and friends, but in Mario Kart Wii, he has a lot of interesting tracks and secrets to uncover. Today, that's what we're going to be taking a look at, so let's not waste any more time and let's begin. This is Yoshi's model. It sits at 695 tries and 1,068 edges. Taking a look at this model, it's actually a very simplified model. Although it does look really well polished for the time, it doesn't use too many polys at all. It also uses them a bit more effectively than any of the previous models we've taken a look at in this series so far. First, we gotta take a look at his nose. Yoshi has a ginormous nose, definitely one of the largest in the Mario series, and especially the largest in this game. It's very bulbous, and when you're playing the actual game is very round, since you're usually playing from such a far away angle. But as we take a look up close, it definitely is a lot sharper than you'd expect to see. So that is one of the places where maybe a few more polys would have benefited this model. Taking a look at the back, you can see the bump or saddle, whatever you want to consider it, is pretty decently round, though it doesn't use many triangles. And he does have that classic sharp dinosaur tail. The fins on the back as well are very seldom in polys, only containing about 4 triangles per side, as you can see here. Yoshi doesn't wear any clothes as he's just a dinosaur, so he doesn't need to, except for the shoes. He does have on a nice pair of shoes. They're more like boots, but taking a look here, they actually have a pentagon at the top to mark the opening. It's funny just how few polys actually can illustrate a perfectly fine boot opening. And taking a look at the bottom of his shoes as well, you can see that there is sort of a rectangular shape going on, but also at the head there is a triangle tip. This model doesn't really need too many details on the shoes, but it definitely does have a lot less than Mario or Luigi's shoes, funnily enough. We also have this low poly version of Yoshi that loads in for the CPUs when they're far enough away from your camera view. And one of the funny things I want to look at is the actual saddle on his back. This is a very low poly standout part of this model, and honestly it is one of the uglier parts of this low poly model, but regardless, I think it meets what has to be done. I mean, you're never going to see these up close, as I just stated, so it doesn't matter. However, Yoshi does seem to lose one of his fins. Instead of 3, he goes down to 2. Now, this might just be due to the fact that he is seated in a biking stance in this model here, but it is an interesting observation. Another interesting thing is under the very blocky, low poly nose, he actually has a permanently open mouth, which you do not see on the normal model, obviously. It's a funny little detail that I never really would have noticed from afar. He's got the triangular hands, though, with the brick feet. However, I think in this foot model there is a tad bit more detail than what is standard, but the sole shows that it's just one single triangle at the bottom. What's interesting, though, is that the legs are completely modeled. Something that you will see on Birdo's low poly model is not present. Both the bottom of the Yoshi and the inside of the legs are intact. Now we can get to the actual courses, and first we have DS Yoshi Falls. And obviously the first thing that I wanted to take a look at is the ginormous egg that sits right in the center of this course. I always wanted to know what was inside this egg, if it was a hidden Yoshi, or absolutely nothing at all, or anything in between. Sadly though, I was right on my second guess, and there really is nothing in this egg. It would have been funny if Nintendo hid a little Easter egg in here, but since they figured that no one would ever be taking an up-close look, I guess they just decided not to. I don't blame them since they tried their best to optimize this course at every angle, but it is unfortunate to see. We also have these waterfalls that come right from the top of the course all the way down to the bottom where the Yoshi egg is actually sitting. And something that's interesting is that the models of the waterfalls are actually slightly in front of the mountain here. They're not carved in, they're not on the same plane, and the mountains are fully textured behind these waterfalls, which is interesting. We also have these little overhangs that hang over the course, and the actual roof of them is not modeled either. It's completely transparent and showcases the actual course when you look at it from the top here. There is no way to see this from in-game, luckily, but it is funny because some of the other ones on the other side that are visible definitely have the roof. It perfectly makes sense in my mind though. I mean, to optimize every part of this game, they wanted to remove as much as they could. Another optimization choice they made is that the trees closer to the course are 3D modeled, while the ones just slightly behind them are just 2D cross textures. This is something I actually could kind of tell when playing the game. It's not a well-hidden secret, but to be honest, most people are too busy focused on their race and keeping their #1 position than actually looking at these trees. But now that we get a chance, they are here. Something though that is interesting about these trees that I did not notice while ever playing this game, and is impossible to really tell until going into free cam, is that the base of these trees actually have these weird Mario Kart logos on them. I guess these are the roots, and maybe they acted as some sort of way to tell how far the trees needed to be put underground. I really have no understanding as to why this could have been done, and I hope someone in the comments is able to tell me. If you know, please tell me and I will pin it. But it's a very weird feature of this course that I just did not expect to see. It's only the 2D textures of these trees that have these too, and the 3D models do not have this same error, if this even is an error. But I would take a guess that if they wanted to really optimize this as well as possible, they would not have went ahead and used these Mario Kart logos as the roots. I'm sure it takes up just a little bit more data than they would have liked. Another interesting thing from beneath the course is that the water plane is actually just one ginormous square or rectangle, and is not cut off at all by the walls of the course here. Another little interesting error is that on this waterfall bridge over here, there is actually a texturing error where the actual finish line is overlaid on top of the actual wood. It's also a little smeared towards the edges too, and it's just funny to see. This wasn't a texturing error in my model viewer or anything because I'm actually using free cam in the game, so this was always here, and theoretically if you could get behind the barrier you'd be able to see it too. The game does also retain the Yoshi's Egg and Super Mario GP advertisement billboards from the DS version of the game. What's funny is that beneath Yoshi's Egg it actually says Waluigi Grand Prix. I don't know why they made that connection, and this is not ever in a Waluigi Grand Prix as far as I know, but it is interesting to see that it is labeled Waluigi Grand Prix. This is absolutely one of my favorite courses visually though. Although it is a very short course, I actually have this angle of the course as my wallpaper on my computer, just to show you how much I truly appreciate this course. Now, Yoshi doesn't really have another course named after him, but there is this battle course called Cookie Land that is actually based off of an NES game called Yoshi's Cookies. It's a very niche game. I do actually own it, but not too many people know about this game, honestly. And just like the NES game, Cookie Land is also a very underwhelming battle course. It's a very small, low detail course, with the only detail really being in the outside cookies and the wallpaper surrounding the entire battle course. As you can see from the bottom, nothing is textured and it's completely transparent as you'd expect. There isn't also any real hidden secrets, aside from the Yoshi cookie that's on the wall here that some of you might not have ever noticed, but others probably have. There is also the actual cookie that the course takes place on in this background here, and then the rest are these square checkerboard pattern cookies as well, that do appear as giant 3D models surrounding the outside of the actual course. There really isn't much else to cover with this battle course, and unfortunately, there isn't too many other Yoshi-related courses, so let's move on to Birdo and her model. Now, the interesting thing about Birdo is she's actually the first trans character in gaming, so I guess truly this was a male, but for simplicity, we're just gonna call it a she, because I always thought this was a girl as a kid, and I'm just gonna keep saying she regardless. But this model sits at 661 tries and 1,019 edges. She has a very similar body style to Yoshi, but unlike Yoshi, she has this giant inward nose. In the original game she came from, this was used to shoot eggs at Mario, but there is no such mechanic in Mario Kart Wii, so at this point it's just become sort of a vanity design choice, and who knows if she'll ever come back as a villain again in her original form, but I guess it really doesn't matter. She has the exact same eye format as Yoshi as well, but she does have a little bit of makeup on her, and she does have a nice set of eye pupils as well. I do like how it sort of goes from blue to purple. This ginormous bow on her head too is also a very interesting shape. It's managed to keep its very rounded look while also maintaining a seldom amount of polys. She has 3 spines on the back of her and none on her head, unlike Yoshi, but she also doesn't have a saddle either, so this space definitely needed to be filled with something. She also has the exact same belly and tail as Yoshi, so I'm pretty sure they would have just borrowed it from Yoshi to model Birdo. Unlike Yoshi though, she actually doesn't wear any shoes and just has these outwards claws. They're not separated by any transparent elements here. As you can see, these are actually textured gray pixels in between her toes. And taking a look at the bottom of her feet as well, she also has these little patches as well and still retains the exact same nail model on the bottom. So seeing it from this angle kind of looks pretty silly. She also seems to have these nails on her thumb and finger. At least that's what I think is on the inside of her fist there. It could have been an attempt at trying to make some transparency, but I genuinely do think that it was just her nails that were attempted to be textured. And just like Yoshi, she also has her low poly Birdo model. This model retains the ginormous bow on the back, and although it still remains a big centerpiece of her character, it does lose the roundness that it once had. As you can see on the back here, it just uses one main ginormous triangle to achieve most of the detail. She does, however, retain her 3 spines. She doesn't lose one like Yoshi's did, and she also has those triangular fists and rectangular feet like Yoshi did as well. But like I said earlier, the bottom of her legs actually are not modeled at all. This could be due to the fact that she's seated in the car orientation for the model, or it could just be that they didn't care about saving polys on Yoshi and decided to save them on Birdo. Who's to say? Now for the final course, we have Grumble Volcano. I can admit that this doesn't really fit into Yoshi or Birdo's aesthetic, and honestly would have fit more into Bowser's aesthetic perhaps. But to be honest, we already have 3 courses for Bowser, and we have 3 characters for Bowser, so that's going to be a long enough episode as it is. And without this course, we wouldn't really have a third for Yoshi and Birdo. But the one connection that I can make, for it to make a little bit of sense at least, is that like Birdo shooting the eggs out of her nose, this volcano shoots these lava balls out of its top. So there's the connection I'll make for you. Now the first thing I immediately noticed as I was loading into this course is that, just like Peach Beach, this has a mirage filter as well, meant to sort of add this little extra reflection and heated mirage look that any super warm area like this should have. That being said, when taking a look at this through FreeCam, it is very huge and annoying to see. But I mean, what choice do I really have? It's here and it ain't going anywhere. The first thing I really wanted to take a look at though is this volcano model that shoots out these little fireballs. As you could expect, the back of the volcano to save tries is not modeled at all. And honestly, up close, this is a very simplified model too. It's got some repeating textures and doesn't really have too much detail within it. We can also take a look at these fireballs that get fired out of the volcano and head right towards the actual course. Interestingly, these fireballs are actually fully 3D modeled spheres that come hurtling towards the course until the second they drop onto the actual track, where they get rendered in as 2D burning fire textures that just constantly billboard towards the player. The other form of fireballs in these courses are actually these little fireball enemies. I don't know the true name for them, so leave them in the comments below if you know them. But I wanted to know, how early on in this pipe do they spawn before truly flying out of it? So we can take a look at that here now, and it's honestly not too early. They spawn in each as individual balls and don't just all spawn in at at one point like I would have originally thought, but I guess to save a little bit of data, they did go with this approach. Not that it really matters, since they're all joined together on the outside of the pipe, so how much time or data does this really save? Who's to say? Something interesting too is that when these platforms are not seen by the camera and your character is far enough away, they actually are not loaded in at all. As you can see, it's just this giant empty space within the track that to the untrained eye would kind of just look like a dead end. But when you get close enough, they obviously do spawn in for anyone that knows this course. We also have the inside of this volcano as well, the only volcano in this course that you actually get to drive through. And when you take a look at these lava falls from the top, you can actually see quite a big gap in between. It is funny to see, but it is a smart way too to save some polys and data. Another interesting feature when you go a little bit deeper into the volcano is this section of the track with this stone lattice is actually textured on both sides, where the roof is transparent on the top end. I really doubt that there's a way to see the other side of this stone lattice in game, so I wonder why they decided to allow the textures to seep through on both sides. Since they're so keen in making sure that everything that can't really be seen is sort of erased, I just don't know why they decided to go with this. Daisy is one of the fastest characters in Mario Kart Wii, but something even more interesting than that is all of the secrets that are hidden away in Daisy's courses and models. That's what we're going to be taking a look at today, so let's get started right away. Now, as always, we're going to start off with Daisy's models, and just like Peach, she has a dress and a biker uniform. And obviously, if you watch the Peach episode, you'll already know that the dress is lower in poly count. Her dress model sits at 746 tries and 1,181 edges, while her biker uniform sits at 1,013 tries and 1,574 edges. So honestly, it's quite the contrast between the two, but as we can take a look and see here, the head models are exactly the same, as well as the crown models. Now, if you remember from the Peach episode, she had these very squared off prism-like earrings, where Daisy actually seems to have hexagonal earrings, with maybe a little bit more tri-work even done on them. They definitely do fit the vibe of Daisy better than Peach's earrings, since they have the actual Daisy logo on them. And we can also take a look at the crown too and see that it's also a very similar case. She has the red gems like Peach's crown did, but instead of the blue, they're actually replaced again with the Daisy flower logo. The same also goes with her chest pendant as well, that being replaced with the exact same logo instead of the blue pendant that Peach had on her chest. And a lot of the Peach biker model and dress model were borrowed for Daisy's model. As you can see here, the boots and the shoes on both the biker and dress model are exactly the same as Peach's were. The only thing that was really different is the actual textures of this model. And similarly to Peach, Daisy also has her low poly models for when the computer is driven far enough away. I always love taking a look at these models, and as we can see here, they actually did a really good job on Daisy's. Sometimes they really screw it up, but this time they actually managed to do a decent job while making it a low poly model. Something interesting is that Peach's low poly model actually had 3D modeled earrings, where these ones are just fully textured 2D planes. They really scale down the Daisy flower logo, and if we look at the crown too, it actually reverts back to Peach's normal blue gem instead of Daisy's actual flower. And just like Peach, Daisy also does not have a neck. Her head just floats slightly above the actual dress or biker uniform, as you can see here. And just like every other low poly model, they have the triangular hands and feet that are always interesting to just take a quick look at. Another interesting contrast is that the bottom of Daisy's dress actually isn't modeled unlike Peach's was. Peach's wasn't fully modeled, but it did wrap around a little bit more than Daisy's, whereas Daisy's is just fully cut off on the base. But that's enough of the models. Let's take a look at our first course, which is Maple Treeway. The reason I chose this for Daisy is because the color scheme matches perfectly with Daisy's vibe, and we needed 3 courses. The first thing I want to take a quick look at is the cannon barrel model here. As you can see, it's supposed to be sort of reflected by this water, but it really does sink well past the actual water plane here. The only thing being reflected are the clouds from the sky. But it's not actually a true reflection, it's just an interesting trick here where they flipped the cloud models upside down and put them underneath the water, and made the water completely clear. We can also take a look at this tree model, and if we take a look at the roof here, it's actually much flatter than I've ever really noticed before. You can see this while you play the game too, so next time you're playing this course, try to take a look at that. Something else that does disappoint me about this tree that I never noticed until taking a look look up close is that there's a large gap that goes around the entire top perimeter of this tree. And again, this can be seen in game, and it is pretty disappointing to know that it's there. Something I never really put two and two together with though is that this tree branch right here is actually the track above. This is a portion of the track that actually goes over this sort of tree stump pit here. And we could take a look at the bottom of that too, and it's very interestingly modeled at the base. I always thought it was darker, but it seems that it's not dark at all. You can really just see the full entire bottom of it. All around the map too, there's these little huts or houses, whatever you want to call them, that are very interestingly built and not like anything else we've ever seen in Mario before. They also never really tell us who the inhabitants of these are, so that'll always be a mystery, I guess. We can also take a look at the background real quick too, and there is a bunch of trees and mountains that perfectly cover up the actual landscape. I really do appreciate the detail they put into this, at least. It does really give off that fall, pre-Halloween sort of vibe. I also want to take a look at this drawbridge too, and there's nothing too interesting about just looking at the model itself, but when you drive far enough away, the actual entire model despawns. This is a good optimization choice, and I do like that, so I'll give them points on that. This isn't the case for a lot of things on this track. In fact, most of the things stay rendered in almost entirely the whole time, so to see finally something get rendered out for a change, especially on this track, is nice to see. Up next we have Coconut Mall. Now the thing with Coconut Mall is it's not really based on anyone particularly, but the staff ghosts are both Daisy, so I'm definitely going to go ahead and give her this track as well. And the first thing I want to take a look at is just the aerial view of this track in its entirety. I mean, it's a very interesting looking track once you take a look at it from this angle. It's stacked very weirdly and does make sense because it's supposed to be a mall, but it's just cool to finally see it. The track also extends pretty far out too. I mean, you can see this road goes on for a pretty long time right next to this beach before it finally gets cut off by the void. This has got to be one of the largest areas that a track takes place in, but who knows? It might be beaten by Rainbow Road or something like that we'll take a look at eventually. We also have the parking lot, and something that's interesting about these little character models in these cars that act as sort of obstacles is that they have sort of these little 3D modeled bodies, but their heads are entirely 2D, and that's something I never even noticed. We also have a bunch of these little storefronts too. Stores like Matu World, Tropica, Funflower, and Fountain Cafe. There's a bunch of these all around the track, and sometimes they even have Miis that spawn in once you get close enough, like this store right here, but for the most part they remain empty until the player's there to see it. The one store that has the most detail though is definitely Delfino Dream, as this is the only store that's open to the public, at least in this race. You can see all the different suits, bathing suits, and dresses that are on display here. Although you're not really ever going to take too much of an up close and personal look as you're driving through the shortcut, they did give enough effort to actually display some stuff on the shelves. Interestingly too, behind the counter you can also see a bunch of different Mario based items, so that's a funny detail you may or may not have noticed. We also have this section of the track with a little bit of a transparent floor that showcases some detail underneath, but taking a look at the bottom of it, it's really weird to see. You can see a bunch of stores, these big flowers, and the actual column that holds up the water fountain. We also have a wide array of spectators always watching the match, a bunch of Miis that just sit around and enjoy the race. Some of them are even in spots that you would never really see from the track, so it's interesting just how far out they put these Miis. And they never despawn no matter how far away you are from them. What does despawn though is this escalator right here. Normally both escalators would be going in opposite directions that would either speed you up or slow you down, but when you're not close enough to them, they just go completely out of service. It does appear too that there's some hidden text underneath that says coconut, which is funny because this is never ever shown in the game, but it definitely is there. You'd expect it almost to be completely empty or not modeled at all, but no, it does have some detail. Another thing too that's also not rendered in is this ginormous palm tree. Now when you wrap around this little metal corner right here, there is this ginormous palm tree that hangs over, but once you're out of its view, it actually completely disappears. It's a funny detail, and that's what I call good optimization. Now up next we have Baby Daisy's model, and this model sits at 912 tries and 1,516 edges. This is a very similar model to Baby Peach's, so we're not going to talk about it for too long. The main differences obviously being the actual head, the hairstyle, and the textures. And just like Daisy, Baby Daisy's crown also has the Daisy gem instead of the normal blue diamond or gem, whatever stone it is. But just like all the other babies, Baby Mario, Luigi, and Peach, she has the fat baby stomach with the thin baby arms. And her shoe color does actually match Daisy's like I talked about in the Peach episode, so that's an interesting little detail as well. But since this is almost an entire rip of Baby Peach's model, let's move on to the low poly Baby Daisy model. which I can also admit is pretty close to Baby Peach's low poly model. Both those characters are very similar to the point where they could borrow so much from each other that it really wouldn't make a difference. The Soother has the ginormous black triangle that I can only assume would be rendered out once you're actually in the race. She has the very low definition facial details as well. Her eyes are very pixelated, as well as her hairline. Every other detail like the crown and the shoes are also very low definition as well. She has square hands though, unlike the normal triangular hands that you see on a low poly model, which is interesting. But this model is so low poly, I'd say it could even fit into the DS version of Mario Kart. And finally, we have the track that is truly based off of Daisy and cannot be debated. It is Daisy's Circuit. And to be honest, this is the track that kind of got me into making this whole entire series to begin with, because as a kid, I always wanted to know what was beyond this path. Now, normally as you're driving, there's a roadblock that stops you from going any further, and you can't fit in between the actual roadblocks. So as a kid, I always wanted to know what could possibly be beyond there, and how far along does it go? And the answer is it's actually pretty far. I mean, as we travel down here, you can see that it really truly goes much further than you'd expect. It does wrap around this building pretty far before getting entirely cut off, and as you can see here through the transparent modeling, it goes quite a bit further than the eye could ever see. We also have the return of Daisy's Cruiser here. This does make an appearance on Peach Beach as well, but we have the exact same model, just ported and put into this course to add a little bit more detail. We've already talked about it in Peach's episode, so we'll move on pretty quickly. I just wanted to mention that it was sitting here. We have some interesting sponsors on Daisy's Circuit as well. Some of my favorites, to be honest, like Fire Flower Oil, 1UP Coffee, Daisy's Circuit, and other such sponsors as well that line the entire start area of the track. But the biggest sponsor is Daisy Candy. Now, I never really knew that Daisy was a candy manufacturer in her kingdom, but it appears so. I mean, as you can see here, they've got the daisies, the hearts, the watermelons, and the star candies all on the billboard. I wonder if Nintendo would ever consider making these in real life and bringing them to like a Nintendo World or something like that. That could be interesting. We also have some more of the cookie cutter spectators as well, with the bright yellow umbrellas. Some Shy Guys, moles, toads, and Goombas are all witnessing this race. There's also the known shortcut here through the building that I wanted to take a look at through the actual inside of the building, and it's pretty funny to just see it standing alone here all by itself. I never noticed this too, but there's also another barricaded off part here with a little sidewalk that leads into the actual underpass here. It goes for a pretty long time and almost gets cut off by the sidewalk underpass, but technically does keep continuing. We also have this ginormous lighthouse here, and unlike Peach's monuments, this one just looks like a standard normal lighthouse model. It's not a suspicious shape and looks exactly as a lighthouse should. We also have the ginormous Daisy and Luigi statues that stand here dancing in the middle of the track, and as well as the baby Daisy and Luigi statues a little further down. But another nice optimization trick is that they actually despawn these when you can't see them. It's a very smart move in my opinion, because these are probably pretty hefty models to keep loaded in. We also have this ginormous hotel-esque building that you'd never really be able to see the roof of, but taking a look at the roof, it actually has some texture. Now, that being said, it's not good texturing, and to be honest, it's pretty much a mishmash of weird tile textures, but it is what it is, and it does exist. What's interesting is that the actual shortcut building's roof does not have any textures, and I think that it's even shorter than the hotel building, and neither really gets showcased in the intro of the course, so I don't know why they would have put a roof on one and not the other. But you know what they say, if you like it, then you should have put a roof on it, or something like that, I'm not too sure. I also wanted to take a look at the overpass bridge here too. I always thought there was going to be something up here, and taking a look, it's actually not much at all. Just a plain of grass with a bridge for overlookers to watch the race on. No road, no other details, just a hill. So that is a little disappointing too, but it makes sense as they never really showcase this in the track at all. Toad is one of the most overlooked and forgotten characters in the Mario series, but today we're going totally against that narrative and looking deep into all of Toad's models and courses. We're going to be taking a look at courses like Toad's Factory, Mushroom Gorge, and Sherbert Land. So let's not wait any longer and let's get started. First, we're going to take a look at Toad's model. This model sits at 552 tries and 841 edges. Now this is a very simplified model. In fact, it might be one of the smallest models in the game, aside from the actual low poly CPU LOD models. And although it remains very tiny in poly count, we actually do seem to have a decently rounded mushroom cap and head. The details on this guy are obviously very pixelated once you take an up close look, but for the distance you'd normally see him at, it doesn't really matter. He's got his cute little face, his nice little blue vest, his strange looking pants or diaper, I don't know what it's supposed to be, and his very simplistic, huge feet models. In fact, he doesn't have any leg models. And aside from Toadette, I think this is the only character in Mario Kart Wii that doesn't have leg models. That's playable at least. But since this is such a simple model, I want to just move right on to Toad's LOD CPU model. This model obviously spawns in once he's far enough away from the player character, and it is very silly looking. But although the try count remains very small, you can see that it's actually still decently rounded. The only thing that really sticks out to me is how far his face protrudes out here. As you can see, it's kind of weird how sharp this one edge is. I think they might have been able to add one or two more triangles to really smooth that out, but it doesn't matter. His hands and feet are the standard amount of detail for one of these models. However, since he doesn't have any legs, it's kind of funny looking at the feet. They almost don't connect to the body at all. They're just barely hanging on. Another interesting thing is that he has one missing triangle on the bottom. Like, would it have killed Nintendo to maybe just put one more triangle in? I guess it's like a little bit of optimization, but it really won't make a difference in the grand scheme of things. Now we can move on to Toad's factory, and this is a very, very well made course taking a look at it. There's a ton of detail and probably one of the most highly detailed courses in the game. But the first thing I want to take a look at is the press room. Now, funnily enough, the wall actually has pistons on the side that constantly go. They never load out and they're always powered on. Funnily enough, in the same room, these actual presses that you have to avoid are loaded out the second that you're not in frame. As you can see here, the first row is technically close enough to Toad to be able to see, but the second row right here just showcases the empty port where they'd come out. It is funny to see what they chose to optimize and what they chose not to optimize. Another thing they chose to optimize are these moving platforms here. The second that you're out of sight, these totally disappear as well, as I'd expect since we took a look at Grumble Volcano and saw that that's how they did it with the moving platforms there. But something that's interesting is they also move out the conveyor belts here. These are the only conveyor belts that actually render out, but as you can see, the second they render in, they act as intended. We can also take a look at these little blocks here that act as obstacles and see just how far below the water they go, and it's not too far, honestly. It's a reasonable amount, but it is definitely a little bit further than the actual water line. We can also take a look at this gear on the ground here. This is a void pit that you can fall into accidentally, or if you're bumped into it, and I always thought as a kid that it was a very intimidating looking fall. I mean, with the teeth on the outside and the completely black void, it's just pretty intimidating. Now, as we go through the winding conveyor belts out the emergency door, we can see that there is a giant crowd gathered to watch this match. This crowd, though, is a lot more vibrant than any of the other crowds that we've taken a look at so far. The colors really pop on these guys, from the Toads to the Boos and even the Birdos. We can also see the roof is visible here too, with this ginormous crankshaft on the top. And although this crankshaft is modeled all around, the roof of the actual factory is not. So that is a good optimization choice, because that would be a lot of polys to cover. Interestingly too, we can also take an aerial view of the actual circular conveyor belt system here, which is just another cool look that you don't normally get to see. Finally, we also have these ginormous bulldozers, and I always thought that these looked pretty cool as a kid, but taking an up close look now, they are very boxy and very silly, honestly. Something that's crazy about these wheels too is that the treads actually don't move at all, while the internal wheel actually does. And obviously, since these models would be probably pretty poly heavy, they do render them out as well when you're not in the sight of them. Up next, we have Mushroom Gorge, and the first thing I wanted to take a look at is these mushrooms in the distance. I always thought that these were 3D modeled, but it seems that they just did really good texture work on these. I mean, these do from afar look perfectly 3D modeled, but as we take an up close look, it's obvious that they're just a 2D plane. We can also take a look at this fog pit underneath this mushroom here, and below the fog, we can actually see a very, very low definition grass texture. Just enough for it to actually represent some grass behind the fog, but seeing it from this angle definitely showcases how little definition it has. Interestingly too, there's also two red mushrooms that are loaded out when you're not in this view, so it's funny to see that they rendered those ones out but kept the green one. The same also goes for some of the actual red mushrooms in this cave system, but not all of them. We can also take a look at the gems on the wall, the little aquatic looking coral plants, and a few different variations of mushroom modeling that they did. The mushrooms on the bottom are actually just 2D planed, perpendicular mushrooms when looking at the stem and the actual cap, where these ones on the wall are slightly 3D modeled. They're not super high definition, but they are 3D models, so that's important to see. They're also modeled from the bottom as well. I guess there is a chance that you'd be able to see this in a race if you're falling or something like that, but for such an inconsequential detail, I'm glad that they they ended up doing a little something. There isn't as much as I thought there would be to look at in this course, so let's just appreciate this track from an aerial view and realize just how little they had to do to make this course seem really well detailed. Up next we have Toadette's model. This model sits at 788 tries and 1,205 edges, so slightly more than Toad's, and we can all probably imagine why. It's definitely the hair model here that the normal Toad doesn't have, but interestingly we can strip that away and take a look at Toadette without the hair, and it is a spitting image of Toad. It's definitely just a reused model that they retextured, the only difference actually being in the hair we removed and the dress instead of the normal vest and diaper combo. Everything else remains relatively the same. She's got the same size shoes, the same proportional body and arms, the exact same face and head textures, and the only thing that's really different is the pink mushroom cap, mushroom hair, and clothing. Although she does have a pretty dope red vest, so I gotta point that out as well. We can now take a look at Toadette's low poly model, and this one is very silly. The first thing I wanted to look at is obviously the hair. This is modeled in almost a diamond orientation, but it's very close to just being a full cube instead. The little dots that led up to the head as well are also very low poly, and just like Toad, she has that same protruding face model, which could have maybe been slimmed down a little bit. This one is modeled in the bike orientation, so we can see that the inside of the feet are actually not modeled at all, as well as the entirety of her bottom, unlike Toad, who is only missing one triangle. That's all we have to look at with the models, but we have one more course, which is Sherbert from the N64 originally. And the first thing we obviously got to take a look at is this ginormous penguin. Now, Toad doesn't have a lot to do with this course, but he does kind of waddle like a penguin would, so I guess that's our connection with this one. Now, this penguin was always a giant centerpiece of this course, and it is so cute to take an up close and personal look at. We can also take a look at the much smaller penguins, and something that I never noticed about this course and would never have even known is that the penguins load out the second you can't see them, but the penguin reflections actually don't. And something that's interesting about that is they're not reflections at all. They're just completely mirrored models that are flipped upside down and act as sort of a reflection, while the ice is just half transparent. These little penguin reflections just keep dawdling the whole way, and they never stop or render out, so that's interesting. This course isn't too intensive on polys, I'd imagine, so I guess it really doesn't matter if you load them out or keep them in, but we now know that they're always kept in. Another reflection is the actual course flag here. The text is completely inverted and flipped, and we can see that it reflects on both the ice and water, as those are both semi-transparent planes. It's an interesting way they went about doing it, and was probably a lot easier than actually creating a whole mirror system for just one course. The mountains as well are also mirrored, which makes perfect sense. But we can take a look at the inside of the cave as well here, and see the grown-up version of the baby penguins, which I assume are the exact same model as the main penguin in the center, just scaled down. But these guys don't have a reflection, and when you drive far enough away, they do load out, as you can see here. The second that Toad can't see them and leave his line of sight, they just totally disappear. This course is also very simple, and doesn't have too much to offer in way of detail, but I think we uncovered some important secrets that otherwise we would have never known about. Today's episode is especially exciting, because today we're going to be looking at Wario and Waluigi's models and their courses. We're going to be looking at courses like Wario's Gold Mine, Waluigi Stadium, and Delfino Plaza, so let's not waste any more time and get started right away. First, we have to start off with Wario's model. This model sits at 707 tries and 1,109 edges. Now, right away, I want to take a look at his head, and especially his mustache. He has one of the most complex mustaches in the game, showcasing a ton of try work done here, and I mean it has to be that way since there's so many crinkle cuts in this stash. He also has his ginormous pink nose, which is very different from the color of the rest of his skin, so that's interesting. I've always wondered why they chose that detail. He also has his ginormous protruding German chin, and very pointed Legend of Zelda elf-like ears. He also has his Wario hat, which is basically a elongated version and stretched version of Mario and Luigi's cap with the W in place of the standard letters from Mario and Luigi. And this is one big boy. As you can see here, he's got a ginormous stomach, ginormous arms, and taking a look at the back of him, his overalls are actually crossed over, unlike the normal overalls we see in this game. His legs are also spread very far apart here, so there's definitely not going to be any chafing when he walks. He's also got his elf-ish like green shoes, but they are very small considering the size of the rest of his body. We also have his CPU LOD model here, and right away we're going to take a look at his mustache again, and slimmed down entirely in detail, only being made of one triangle per side. The rest of the details are slimmed down too, like his elf-like ears, pink nose, and Wario hat. However, he remains very round despite the considerable fewer amount of polys on his stomach. His shoes are also way more pointed than they were on his old model, and the same goes for his triangular hands as well. well. Now we can take a look at Wario's Gold Mine, and this was always my favorite course as a kid. Both the scenery and the actual driving experience. But the first thing we have to look at is just how far this ravine goes. And to be honest, it goes very, very far out, being constantly detailed by these little houses on the side the entire time. Taking a look at these houses too, they also have a W on the shingling, a big W on the front on every single house, and some of them even have these green pipe chimneys, obviously being modeled after the standard Mario green pipe. Something interesting though is that taking a look from the inside of these houses, the roofs are actually textured on both sides, where the walls are not. We can also take a look at this hole where the bats come out of, and something that's interesting about these bats that I never really noticed is A, they're not textured from the back, and B, their bodies are just single textures and not modeled at all. The same goes for their wings as well, but I figured that their wings would have been flat, as they don't need to be modeled. Taking a look from the top of it as well, we can also see that they don't spawn in too early. They spawn in at a reasonable time before being showcased on the actual course. We can also take a look at some of these mine carts as well, and they come from all angles. There's obviously the obstacle ones that follow the entirety of this mine shaft portion of the track. These guys get carried off by a rope and disappear into the distance here, as we can see. But there's also these mine carts on the bottom. These can't be seen from up close when you're racing the actual track, so it's interesting to see that these are the exact same models used. I guess it does save a little bit of time instead of having to make a whole new low poly version, but it also might be considered a bad optimization choice, especially considering just how polydense this track must be. We also have Delfino Square, and the reason that I chose this for Wario is because of the Super Wario banners on the side, and also the fact that the time trial ghost is actually Wario himself. First, I want to take a look at this ginormous statue that appears right at the start of the track, and it's a very well modeled statue, I'll give him that. However, the textures on the water are very, very poorly done. You can see it's just a very repeated, shrunken water texture, but I guess it's almost impossible to see this from the racetrack, so it doesn't matter. A good optimization choice though is these trees. You can see there's these 3D modeled trees on the outside of the track, just beyond the barrier, but when you go down this actual street here that's blocked off, you can see there's these 2D textured trees that are great on saving polys. There's quite a few of these streets that just sort of end in nothingness, and they're cut up very shortly, unlike Daisy Circuit where the actual sidewalk in that one went pretty far down. Another optimization choice is at this fruit stand here. There is no one guarding the stands, but once you get close enough, there's actually a Pianta that sits here and cheers you on as the race goes on. There's also a lot of detail put into his dancing animation here. There's a ton of articulation in the arms, the waist, and even a slight rotation of the body. We can also see here that there's these little labels on the signs that cannot be read at all, but maybe they say something like L is real, who knows? It's impossible to say. But just for contrast, we can also take a look at this huge Pianta group here, and their dancing animation is a lot similar, a lot less articulated, and very cost effective honestly on resources. Another good optimization choice is this bridge here that you obviously drive over and either go straight across or get to hit a sick trick on, is loaded out the second that you're no longer in sight of it. That definitely is a good choice, because I can imagine that this mechanism would be a little bit heavy on the actual gameplay here, especially on the Wii. But when it is loaded in, we can also take a look at the actual mechanism used to draw the bridge up and back down. It's a very interesting little mechanism here. I don't know how realistic this would be, because I'm not an engineer, but it is certainly cool to see the detail they added to it. We can also take a look at the roofs of some of these buildings as well, and although you'd never see them in game, they are textured. Not well, of course, and this is a classic thing with the Mario Kart Wii courses. The roofs that are not visible have very weird, stretched out, and unorganized texturing, but that's alright because you'd never even see it. We also have this weird bush conglomeration in the center of the course, and the way they went about building this is very strange. Taking a bird's eye view, it just showcases how wonky it really is, and although it's barely visible, it is important to take a look at and critique a little bit. The bushes on the bottom are stretched out a little bit too far, and none of these actual trees in the back are lined up on the same angle. I guess it adds a little bit of perspective difference, but from this view it definitely is painfully obvious. Up next we have Waluigi's model. This model sits very close to Wario's model at 709 tries and 1,102 edges. So only 2 more tries, but 7 less edges. Very funny. And unlike Wario, Waluigi is the complete opposite, with a very thin and lanky design while being exceptionally tall. Unlike Wario though, he doesn't have too much of a crinkled mustache, only having one sharp angle on it. However, he does retain that pink nose that Wario had, but it is a different shape. Again, he's got the classic plumber hat on with the inverted inverted upside down L, and he also has the same elf-like ears that Wario had. He also has a ginormous chin though. This thing is a monster, almost as big as the Crimson Shins, if you know who that is. And above that, he's got a very evil grin. His shoes are also much more elf-like with a much sharper point at the end. And it seems to me like he's wearing skinny jeans with a bell-bottom flare at the bottom as well. That's just a funny little detail that I noticed just now. We can also take a look at his low poly model, and everything in it is absolutely hilarious in my opinion. The nose and the mustache are scaled down quite a bit. The details on his face are highly pixelated, and the blue around his eyes is even more accentuated, with a much larger ring around it. However, he keeps that very thin, limber look to him, having his very long arms and legs, reaching out for an invisible wheel that would obviously be rendered in a race. He's got very pointed shoes again, he didn't lose those, and his hands are still triangular as every other model's been. But now we can look at a very beautiful course, which is Waluigi Stadium. The first thing I want to take a look at is the actual roof of this place. Again, you would never see this in the game, but it is textured and modeled, and the texture work is actually pretty well done on this roof, I'm not gonna lie, so I'll give them points on that. And just like the roof, the back of the lights are also modeled and textured. Now, this is unnecessary too, as you would never see the back of these lights at all, but they are there. We also have this ginormous screen that shows the actual race going on, and is basically just a copy and paste of the third-person camera that hovers over the cart. As we can see, bringing the camera in front of the actual monitor here shows a quite interesting infinite portal design, just showcasing a ton of the actual monitors constantly going until it just becomes a giant glowing ball of white. We also have a ton of fans in the stadium, however they are very dull and not very colorful at all. But because it's such a dark stadium with the lights pointed towards the course and not towards the fans, this is to be expected. Something else that's kind of funny that I also just noticed as an editor's note is these fans behind the monitor are entirely blocked from watching the race here, as you can see. This should have been disclosed when they were buying their seats from Ticketmaster, but I have a feeling that in the Mario world, things are not as cut and dry. They also have these frowny face and strange cat-like whisker banners as well. I'm not sure where these are derived from, and if anyone has an idea of where they might have gotten the inspiration to put these, let me know. We also have a ton of sponsors on this course like Big Fire, Super Mario, Wario Kart, Waluigi's Grand Prix, and even Nintendo. And of course the big sponsor of the stadium being Waluigi himself, who's trying to switch the name of the game to Waluigi Kart, as we can see by the billboard. But try as he may, it just never seems to pan out for him. Up next we can look at these flare obstacles, and the actual fireballs on them are just 2D textures. I always figured this, but it's interesting to see from this angle just how flat they really are. However, what's not just a 2D texture is this ginormous piranha plant here that comes bursting out of the pipes. Now, taking a look at the inside, although it is very cramped, you can see that the entire piranha plant is loaded in the entire time. No matter how deep into the pipe he gets, they never render him out, even to save a few bytes of data. However, once you are out of sight of both of these obstacles, they completely disappear, leaving a completely empty U-shaped bowl, and only leaving the actual shadows behind. And taking one last bird's eye look at this course, it is an absolutely stunning course, and perfectly encapsulates how a stadium should look, especially a dirt bike stadium, which this course was obviously based off of. But I also wanted to take a look at the sky as well, which is a very German flag-like color scheme, with the reddish, yellowish, and black tints to it. Something that's interesting about this sky though that I would have never noticed without the model viewer is that the clouds actually have little smiley faces hidden in them. As we take a look up close, some of these bad boys are actually smiling back at us. You'll have to let me know in the comments if you've seen this before, or if this is also your first time, because I swear I would have never even been able to tell that these guys are smiling. It's almost impossible to see, even up close, but taking a very precise look at it, it is there. Today's episode is very special. This is one I've been looking forward to for a while. We're going to be looking at Donkey Kong, Funky Kong, and Diddy Kong's models, and all of the courses associated with the DK family. So let's jump right in. First, we're going to be comparing DK and Funky Kong's models together. Donkey Kong's model sits at 765 tries and 1,159 edges, while Funky Kong sits at 951 tries and 1,497 edges. Now, although these guys look relatively similar, there are some key differences aside from the actual general look of them. I mean, obviously, we have Funky Kong's bandana, glasses, and overall clothing that Donkey Kong lacks for the most part aside from the tie. But something else interesting that Funky Kong only has is flared nostrils. nostrils. Donkey Kong's model does not have any differentiation in the nostrils here. As you can see, it's just a texture printed onto a somewhat flat surface. With Funky Kong's, there's a little bit more detail to it. And even the ear models are a little bit more refined on Funky Kong's model. Not a lot, maybe a few extra triangles, but there is more sharp edges on Donkey Kong's ears. Something else that's interesting is that the shoulders of Funky Kong seem to be a little bit stronger than Donkey Kong. Maybe this indicates that Funky Kong can bench a little bit more than DK, who knows? And obviously, unlike Donkey Kong, Funky Kong wears a pair of shorts that do add a little bit extra to the model, as I'm sure he is modeled underneath as well. However, the hands and the feet models are exactly the same. I can't really spot a big difference between the two, so I gotta imagine that they just copy and pasted those and kept those exactly the same. The reason Funky Kong's model is probably a little bit higher poly as well, aside from the clothing, is because they probably used Donkey Kong's model as a reference from Double Dash, since those models really don't change at all from Double Dash to Wii, and just gave it a little extra fine tuning here and there to really make Funky Kong stand out a little bit more. We also have their low poly models, and they are very funny looking, some of my favorites I've seen so far. And one thing that sticks out right away is the fingers on these guys. They have such ginormous spacings in between the finger, and they do stick out much more than anything else on the models. And even though they went really low definition on the finger spacing, there is a little bit higher definition on Donkey Kong's eyes, but not on Funky Kong's sunglasses. His bandana though does have a little bit more detailing on it, making the pixels a little bit smaller to really give off that dotted pattern that his bandana's always had. They do retain the main things that their models originally had though, like Funky Kong's clothing and Donkey Kong's signature tie. Now we can take a look at DK Mountain, and this course is a beauty when you're racing it. As we take a look at the side here, we can see some awesome foliage that's actually dancing back and forth and is never really utilized on any other course. So these palm trees and flowers were only really utilized one time. We also have these other little palm trees here that seem to have elephant-like trunks, but are just meant to be branches that are placed perfectly within the center of these guys' faces. Another interesting detail is these little tulips, or whatever kind of flower they are, I'm no flower expert, actually have eyes on them. I'd never even really noticed this playing the course, which is kind of weird as they're right in front of my eyes, but taking an up-close look, I can definitely see them now. We also have the giant DK banner here, and I've always loved this banner. It really ties the course together and adds a nice detail to this side of the mountain that otherwise wouldn't have had anything. But behind the mountain here, you can see that it wasn't modeled at all, which makes perfect sense as it's completely out of the view of any of the actual racers. But while we're really out of bounds, I want to take a look at these little volcanoes here in the distance that blow out little O-rings from the top of them. These were always super cute models, and there's quite a few of them on the course, with this one in the further distance being visible from the actual launch cannon, having a lot more detail than the rest of them. The others are just simple monotone colors, only being a beige, while this one seems to have a gray stone-like appearance with a brownish clay base at the bottom. But obviously this is not the biggest volcano model in the game, as there is the ginormous volcano that you actually race on. This one has the very angry face and is actively erupting as we play the game. But taking a look at it from a different perspective showcases just how little actually went into this volcano. The only real details here are in the face, and anything beyond that is completely unmodeled. We can also take a look at this side of the volcano, and although this is visible from in the game, it's not a very common occurrence for people to stop and take a look at it. They just repeat the textures that are already on the sides of the mountains, and overall, keep it pretty simple. I also wanted to take a look at this winding part of the course that appears right after the volcano itself. Usually, there would be a bunch of boulders that are coming down, but since these are always available in the game, there's no real need to take an up-close look at those. And since this was filmed in time trial, they are not loaded in. Finally, we also have this drawbridge, which is actually modeled from the bottom, which I guess could be seen if you fall off the course and hit the rear view camera button at the same time. But the second that you are out of sight of it, it actually loads out, which is very smart, as this is probably a pretty intensive part of the course, even though it's just a simple drawbridge. Finally, we also have this river that the drawbridge actually goes right over, and we can see just how far into the distance this bad boy goes. It is cut off eventually by the actual course borders, but taking an up close look, you can see that the water just sort of spawns in from nowhere, so that's a funny detail. But again, it's so far away that you'd never even really notice. I also want to take a quick look at the DK cannon here, and something that's funny is that the DK logo is only on one side. They decided not to plaster it on the other side. Now, I get that this is going to save probably a few bytes of data, but in the grand scheme of things, is it really that important to not include the mirrored DK logo? Up next, we have DK Jungle Parkway, another beautiful Donkey Kong course. And this one was actually remade from the N64. It does hold that same vibe, but upgrades it just enough for it to perfectly fit in Mario Kart Wii. We have a bunch of different tree models. We have these fully modeled 3D palm trees with two distinct variations, but we also have one in the background here, which is just a crossed over single texture tree. And to be honest, it gets the job done. Even though it is a little bit visible while you're actually playing the course, it does retain that N64 vibe. So I will give it a pass. And we also have the trees in the background here, which are, again, just a simple 2D texture, but they are necessary to fill in the gaps. We also have this giant passenger boat with a bunch of onlookers watching the match, some toads, and the rest of Bowser's army being Goombas, Hammer Bros, and Shy Guys. The funny thing about this boat is that once it leaves the actual viewing portion of the track, it starts to speed up until it makes this wicked U-turn at this side here. The other side has a little bit more of a conservative turn and is not nearly as aggressive, but as we can see here, it does make a more simplistic U-turn. We also have this hatch on the boat, which might have some secrets in it if we check underneath. But as we go deep into it, we realize that no, there's nothing at all. It's just a bunch of untextured internals of the boat that are completely see-through. We can also take a bird's eye look real quick at this near 360-degree turn, which has a little cannon let off. And just looking at it, it's funny to think that all the Donkey Kong courses actually have some sort of launch cannon or launch pad in this case. It just goes to show that Donkey Kong's vibe truly is launching things across the map. We also have this waterfall section that leads to a lower section of the river, which, as we travel down, eventually just leads into nothing. That's to be expected, obviously, but I always like to take a quick look to see what's beyond the actual scope of view. And again, it's nothing. We also have these torches on the wall, and interestingly enough, the torches never despawn, but the actual fire element does. As you can see, once we get close, the fire burns brightly and adds that perfect little detail to this cave section of the course before you finish up your lap. I also got a suggestion in a previous video to take a look at the low poly models as you're racing. So I have a paused instance here of an actual race where the drivers are just out of frame of the actual main camera. And as you can see here, there are a ton of low poly models that we have taken a look at previously. Something that is interesting though is that none of the actual vehicles scale down in polys at all. The only thing that scales down is the actual racer model. There's a ton of familiar faces though from previous episodes that I just love to see actually in the game. Again, it's never something you'd be able to see, but I wasn't fibbing. They do truly load in these low poly models when you're not close enough. Now we can take a look at Diddy Kong's model. This model sits at 670 faces and 1026 edges. Now something that I just thought of as I was doing this video is that Donkey Kong and Funky Kong are obviously meant to be gorillas, but Diddy Kong might not even be related to the Donkey Kong family at all, because gorillas are apes, and Diddy Kong seems to have the traits of a monkey, having a ginormous tail. Now correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I don't believe that apes ever have tails. That's only a property of monkeys. But we can take a look at the tail right now and see just how many polys it actually takes to make up this tail for perfect articulation. Now obviously, if it was just always T-pose, they could have gotten away with just a very long stretch of triangles, but since Diddy Kong's tail is actually animated in the game to move back and forth and articulate, they have to add these little triangular breaks so that I can seamlessly move. Otherwise, it would be a very thinned out, awkward movement, which would not look good at all, and definitely would not be up to Nintendo standards. Diddy Kong also has his classic Nintendo hat with a very long brim for a baseball cap, if I'm being honest, but for Diddy's proportions, it does kind of make sense. He's got those ginormous ears, the classic Kong snout, and his giant beady eyes. It's funny just how many traits he actually does carry on from Donkey Kong, while probably not even being the same species, unless Mario's world has different evolution rules. He is very thin though compared to Donkey and Funky Kong, with very limber arms and legs. However, he does have very hand-like feet, as you would see in many different apes or monkeys. We also have his low poly model, and to be honest, I am disappointed in this one a little bit, as they completely removed the Nintendo logo on his hat, and I get that it necessarily wouldn't even fit given the amount of pixels that they're trying to achieve, but that's not my biggest complaint. Something even bigger is the fact that his mouth and nose have totally disappeared. He doesn't have any pixelation representing a mouth or nostrils, and is left with a completely blank snout. But again, that's not even my biggest complaint. So what's my biggest complaint? Well, it's the fact that he's completely lost his tail. I mean, taking a look at the back here, he doesn't even have his tail anymore. It seems to have been completely severed and left in the dust, as it's just out of sight, out of mind. I get they're trying to save polys, but not including the tail is one of the 7 deadly sins when it comes to modeling Diddy Kong. Aside from that, there's not too much deviation from a normal low poly model. Again, we have the triangular hands and feet, although his feet are very flat, and he has a very fat, round stomach compared to his normal model. Finally, we can take a look at DK Summit, another beautiful course in the Donkey Kong triad. Now, just like in the last episode, we have an actual spectator block here as well. Taking a look at the spectators' quarters from this view, where obviously we have some people watching the race, it is very hard to see anything aside from this one final stretch of the course. This would be a terrible seat to be placed in if you were going to one of these Mario Kart racing events, so I do feel bad for these guys in the back. Speaking of the back of the actual audience stands, again, is not modeled, but I do like to take a look at it from this angle just to to see. We have this Shy Guy lift, and something that we never get to see, no matter how close up you get, is the inside of the loading dock here. As you can see, the chairs go in completely empty, make a few turns, and then boom, the Shy Guys just appear out of thin air right on the seats going upwards to the hill. And these guys are pretty densely modeled for something that you just see in the background. I think there are Shy Guys that sit even closer to the course on other tracks that are lower poly modeled than this. So this is funny to see. We can take a look at the inside of the unloading dock as well at the top of the mountain and see that it's a very similar method where the chair makes a few turns and then poof, just like they appeared, they're gone again in the wind. I do also want to take a quick look at the slope that these guys would actually be snowboarding down on, and it is a pretty interesting little course, although it is lined by these 2D texture trees which kind of throw off the vibe from this angle. But again, no one's ever going to be seeing it from this angle aside from me and you, so it does make sense that they did it this way. Now, just like we talked about on DK Mountain, there is a Donkey Kong cannon that has the DK logo pasted on the side, but as we take a look from the other side, it's actually fully pasted. Now, I guess there's a slight chance that you'd be able to see this from the course, so they might have included it for that reason, but it's funny that they went about doing it this way and didn't include it on DK Mountain. We also have the DK cannon logo on the front of it here, where the actual toll gates will lift up when you're driving up close to them. However, when you're far enough away, both the cannon and the actual toll rods totally disappear. We also have these little snow mounds here that are just very, very funny to see from a bird's eye view. Obviously, you'd never see this normally. I don't know why it's so interesting to me, but it does look very silly and looks like one of the hardest tasks for anyone trying to read Braille. We also have a bird's eye view of the actual U-turns here, and going underneath the course, we can actually see that the black of the actual abyss is a texture and isn't actually just the bottom of the world. I guess this is so that eventually when you fall into this pit, it'll totally black out the character model instead of having it just completely fall forever until it gets so small you couldn't even see it. But now we know. We also have this little half pipe here where these snowboarding Shy Guys are usually doing their tricks, but we actually don't get to see them until we get up close and personal. But once we do, we can see them hitting some sick tricks, with the red Shy Guy specifically having the best style on the board. It's funny that these guys load out the second you can't see them, because the Shy Guys on the lift never load out. They're always going no matter how deep into the course you are. It's a funny detail, and I wonder if they meant to do that or if they just forgot to load them out. Just like Waluigi Stadium 2, we also have an Arena Titantron, which just relays the actual camera feed and doubles it onto this Titantron. Once we get up close, you can see the swirling abyss that this monitor ends up becoming. We also have these Mii models that watch the course from this sideline here, and from the front they look completely normal, as they should. But from the back, you can see they went for a very different modeling technique. These guys are modeled almost all the way around except for the back portion, and they seem to have these half spheres on the top part of their shoulders. I don't think I've ever seen this method of modeling Mii's from any of the other courses, so that is something that stands out. We also have these silly little billboards that are not actually sponsoring anything, that just say little phrases like jump or tricks. And there's also one that says DK Mountain here. Now, I guess this is another DK Mountain on a technicality, but this isn't the actual DK Mountain. As you might know, DK Mountain is the first course we actually got to take a look at. And finally, I wanted to take a quick peep at Funky Kong Stadium, as there are a few little secrets here. The first half secrets are these little billboards again at the top of the course here, with again the improper labeling being DK Mountain when this is in fact Funky Kong Stadium. However, we do have one that says DK Halfpipe, and then finally we do actually have the proper billboard, which is Funky Stadium. Now, these can be seen from the course, so it's not a huge secret, but we never get to see them up close and personally like this. Just like DK Summit, we also have a Titantron in Funky Stadium, which has the exact same properties as all the other Titantrons. And we have these ginormous spotlights that hang over the course as well. These are actually pretty well modeled, honestly, and have a little bit more detail than I'd expect from an actual light model. But I guess they save a little bit of data on the backs of these things, which are completely unmodeled. And they even do sort of hide the bright light texture as well. As you can see, the other ones in the distance emanate a slight bright light, where when you're looking at them from the back, you can't see the actual source's light. Something else that's interesting, although the stadium is completely roofed in, the outside of the course, which you can never see, actually has a cloud texture to it, leading me to almost believe that this course originally was going to be an open concept, but at the last minute might have been changed to a simple roofed-in stadium. I can't confirm this, but if I had to guess, that's what I would guess. We also have the giant centerpiece with the actual automated billboard display. It displays words like jump, trick, and then Funky Kong's nice clean mug. However, the lights on the outside of these barrels are actually not true lights in the normal sense. They're just textures on these XYZ planes. It's such a minute detail, and I bet you could tell from just looking at it on the course itself, but since we can take an up-close personal look today, we might as well point that out. In today's episode, we're going to be taking a deep dive into Koopa Troopas and Dry Bones models and courses. We have a ton of interesting secrets to unpack here, so let's get started right away. First, we're going to take a look at Koopa Troopa's model, and this model sits at 616 tries and 955 edges. Now, this is a very cute model, as you can see. He has ginormous eyes, a ginormous nose, or beak I guess in this case, since he is a turtle, and very rounded cheeks as well. We can take a look at the back of the beak here and see that there's a little opening where his mouth would obviously be, and since his mouth does open up in the game, they do have it modeled and textured. Now, although he does fit into the baby category or the small racer category in Mario Kart Wii, he does have some pretty decent proportions considering that fact. His arms and legs are thin and short, but they're not obscenely short like a baby Mario or Luigi model. And obviously the only clothes he really has on are the bright green boots that he has on his feet, and these are pretty well modeled as well. His shell, being his home, is the only other article of technical clothing, I guess you could say, in this sense. But I really love turtles, and this turtle shell model is absolutely phenomenal. We're going to be seeing quite a lot of them in this episode, so I'm going to be very excited for that. But just taking a look at the detail and the texture work on the back, especially considering how close you'd be up on this model, is actually pretty decent. He also has this cute little tail at the bottom as well, which is a great detail that I'm sure was always a part of them, but needed to definitely be enunciated in this game as well. We also have his low poly model, and this is a very cute but goofy model as well. As is customary, all of the actual modeling has been significantly decreased in try count, and interestingly enough, right on the bridge of his nose, you can see this unmodeled texture right here. It's just a white slit that they didn't exactly line up the model textures on. His shell is also severely shrunken down in polys, only being made up of about a dozen triangles. But interesting, just like Diddy Kong in the last episode, he's missing his tail as well. Now, even though this is his bike model, I'm still a little surprised to see that his tail has completely vanished. Something interesting too about the beak is that his mouth is always open, with the pink texture on the actual bottom jaw, but the beak here does not have any modeling or texturing at all. It's just an empty space. The inside of his shoes are missing some polys as well, and again, like every other model, they retain that triangular and rectangular hand and feet models. Now we can take a look at Koopa's course, which is Koopa Cake. This is a very beautiful course in my opinion, and really stands out as one of the better modeling jobs they did in this game. We can take a look at this pipe right off the bat here that spouts out a little bit of water that never really fills up this pool, but is being constantly emptied into it. Taking a look at it from the back, we can see where the water starts, and interestingly, we also see this black cone. And although the face of the pipe is fully modeled, this black cone sort of illustrates to me that they originally tried to make it seem like it was a deeper pipe model, but they decided against it and just covered it all up entirely. That's just speculation, but that's also what it seems like to me. In fact, we have a ton of these pipes with the same sort of modeling done. Taking a look at these pipes underwater from the bottom, there's these black cones we see again. So that kind of reaffirms to me that they were trying to go for a more deep pipe look, but decided against it at the last minute. While we're underwater, we can take a look at all the beautiful aquatic life, like these cheeps here who just dawdle back and forth. And although they are a little bit low polyed, especially around the eye models, it really isn't that bad of a model. The only thing I will point out on the cheep is that the eyes actually intersect here, as you can see. The polys are kind of overlapping in the center of his eyeball models. We also see the eels that make their reappearance here. Originally we took a look at these in the Luigi episode, but they make another debut, with one freely swimming around the bottom of this ocean here, while the other ones are just sticking out of the pipe, constantly going back and forth. We also have a ton of these metal shell models, some that you actually drive through in the piped course area. But interestingly, this red shell on top of the green one actually has a modeled underside. When we take a look from the inside of the shell, you can see that there is a black roof to it that would not otherwise be able to be seen in the game. This isn't the case for all the other shells either. This is just for the red one here, so that's an interesting detail. We also have this yacht that constantly goes around the course, with three little shine looking logos on the outside and a daisy flower closer to the actual cab. It's interesting to see that all of the yachts or big boats or cruise ships that we see in this game are pretty much modeled with Daisy in mind. That being said, it's not every boat, but it is a lot of them. Now, when the racer's underwater, you can see that there's actually this darker tone on the overworld, where it makes everything in the distance seem a little bit gloomy. This isn't the case when you're outside of the water, but since this shot was taken inside the water, and I can use the free cam to go outside of it, it is apparent that they added a little shader detail to that. We can also take a look at this ginormous shell in the distance here, and it is a very similar model to the other shells we've taken a look at, just scaled up significantly. But interestingly, taking a look from underneath, the shell is fully modeled. This is probably to save some time on removing unnecessary polys, and I'm sure they would have removed them if the game wasn't running super smoothly, but since there's never been a real issue on this course, I'm sure that it didn't need to be touched. We also have some very colorful underwater plants. Some of these are just 2D textures on a flat plane, while others are more of a 3D modeled sort of texture, but we can see there's not too much modeling going on with these flat ones on the ground here. They're just simply pyramid shaped models with a very colorful aquatic plant texture on them. We can also take a look look at this waterfall too, and taking a look at it from the back just showcases how small this waterfall really is. When you're driving through this normally, your imagination takes you to a place where you'd think that there's a lot more water behind the actual falls. But obviously to save on resources, they didn't have to model any of that, and it is just more of a instant cutoff than an actual lake behind it. We also have this Koopa sign that usually holds a flag, but when you're not in range of it, it actually despawns the flag and only has the shadow and texture of the Koopa billboard remaining. But once we load back in, you can see that the flag waves back and forth and is a separate model from the actual billboard. Interestingly too, the back of these billboards actually have some texturing as well. This does make sense, as there's a possibility that someone might drive behind the billboard and Nintendo would kind of be caught with their pants down if they didn't model it and someone was able to access it from in the game normally. We also have this waterfall that leads into the track and provides a little bit of a speed boost before we actually go underwater, and although we'd never be able to see this normally, we can take a look at where the source of this water comes from. And as we go down the line, we see that it kind of actually ends up with a fully modeled backing to it. And you can't see this backing from anywhere on the course, so it's funny that they actually decided to fully model this part. Taking a look from behind though, there's not much else. It's just a little slit in the wall that spews out a little bit of water with no actual water source behind it. Up next, we're going to take a look at Drybone's model. This model sits at 811 tries and 1,238 edges, so a pretty significant amount of extra polys on this model comparing it to Koopa's. My main guess is that the extra models come in around the arms and the legs, considering that they are separate bones and not just a flat leg or arm model. And another difference is that Drybones actually has some sharper teeth than Koopa had. I'm sure that the normal Koopa model would have this as well if a skeleton was included, but because this has been fully degloved, we can actually take a look and see that the teeth of this model actually protrude a little bit further than the face we originally knew. His eyes are glowing and lifeless, but they do actually hover a little bit in front of the socket here. As you can see, this is a separate 2D textured plane with a bright yellow oval representing his pupils. Obviously the black of the 2D texture here would be rendered out when it's actually in game, but we can take a look at it in the model viewer and see that it is not in this case. We can also take a look at where his head connects to his body and notice that there is no neck. This does make sense, as canonically the Drybone's head is sort of floating on his body, and in a normal main series game, when you step on him, he does regenerate and his head returns to his body. Again, I want to take a look at this shell and just appreciate real quick the detail on it. They did a really good job with these turtle models, and obviously we're going to get to take a look at some awesome turtle shells in the Bowser episode. But for now, I do appreciate what they did with Drybones. Something interesting though that I never really noticed until this moment is that Koopa Troopa didn't have any gloves, but the Drybones seem to have gloves. I imagine that this is to save a little bit of poly work on individual bone-like fingers, or maybe it's just to simplify the actual Drybones model entirely. But it is interesting that once a Koopa Troopa passes away, or gets degloved in this case, they somehow manage to find a pair of gloves before turning into a Drybones. He also has his cute little bone tail and very dull, lifeless, light gray shoes. We also have the Drybones low poly model here, and this model is again very cute, but very sized down. All the main details stay in place, like his floating head, his very sharp teeth, and his awesome turtle shell. But again, just like Koopa Troopa, the shell has been scaled down significantly, and the entirety of his head is also very sharp. His eyes are no longer separate from his actual skull, and they do remain implanted in the sockets this time. This is the cart-sitted model, so we can see that the hands and the feet really overlap quite a bit actually. And although you'd be too far away to ever really see this in game, it is interesting to see the overlap. But this is a very compact model, all things considered. I mean, everything is tucked away, and although again, he does lose his tail, I do like this model a lot. Up next, we're going to take a look at Desert Hills. And although this course is supposed to be a barren, dry wasteland sort of desert, it does seem to have quite a bit of detail. Specifically, we have what looks to be little billboard holders that obviously don't have any billboards. But the vibe of these really reminds me of the Super Mario Desert levels, which have these little strange structures in them. I'm sure that was the inspiration for them, but just taking a look at it now really reaffirms that. We also have all sorts of these desert abandoned looking builds, like these pyramids, these castle walls in the distance with very hollowed out black windows, and these strange brick buildings with some advertisements on top. Another detail we can take a look at is the angry sun, which shoots out these little fireball obstacle enemies. And it's funny to watch these guys sort of fly out of the sun super aggressively before hitting the course and acting pretty normal. Funnily enough, from what I can tell, the angry sun doesn't really despawn, but the little fireball enemies sure do. I mean, you can see it here. He's trying to shoot out little enemies that are absolutely not appearing. It's probably because the angry sun has so little intensity on the actual processing that they didn't need to load it out. out, but maybe it does get loaded out and I just couldn't get a good frame of it. We also have these strange buildings in the distance here, these little stacked blocks that remind me again of some Mario Desert level builds, and these ginormous orange pipes in the background. Taking a look at these, they're not modeled from the back obviously to save on some polys. However, the entire underside of this is actually modeled. It probably was a safer way to go with it to save some time, but it definitely is there and we can definitely see it from this angle. We also have the massive centerpiece, this ginormous mountain that sits in the middle of the course, and something I never knew before was not actually a traditional mountain. It's more of like a unactive volcano with the way it dips in the middle. As we can see here, it's not exactly a peaked mountain at all. In fact, it's a little inverted on the peak. So maybe it is a volcano or maybe it was a volcano, but I guess now we'll never know. Up next we have Dry Ruins, and although this course could have been used in Yoshi's video, I do feel like a desert vibe fits Dry Bones a lot better. The first thing I want to take a look at is these sand piles that sit inside of the actual tomb here. These guys raise up over time as you're racing the course, and we can see that here as they go ever so slightly up as we wait for the room to fill. But taking a look at it from underneath, you can see the entire model of these sand here. It is a very interesting way they went about doing this, honestly, and you definitely never really be able to see the full extent of how far these cones really go. It's quite far, and to be honest, I don't even think they reach the max height that they could. We also have these little pokies too, and although they are a little bit lower on the poly count, they do a pretty good job of illustrating a round, sort of vertical snake-like enemy. And as you could probably assume, once you're not in view of them, they totally despawn and are nowhere to be seen. Something else that despawns that I didn't figure would is this ginormous Yoshi Sphinx here. It's a very well detailed model, a beautiful model, I'll give it that. I do love how they incorporated Yoshi's face onto the actual real world Sphinx, but when you're out of sight of it, it actually despawns and is not visible at all. You can see it from this angle here. What's interesting though is that these Pharaoh statues actually don't despawn, and what's funny is I think these might even be a little bit more poly intensive than the Yoshi Sphinx, and they totally don't despawn at all. They're here the whole time and they never go anywhere. Now I do understand that these are sort of built into the archway for the start line and the actual tomb. I do think they could have maybe done a little workaround and had them disappear once you were out of frame, but I guess who am I to say, because the game runs perfectly smooth and these don't ever need a load out, so I guess there really was no need after all. And I do really like the detail on these guys. They do sort of have a tiny bit of a Mario vibe to them, considering they have the ginormous nose. But other than that, they are kind of out of place for a Mario game. I will say that. We also have a few little billboards here that just surround the course, some with a little bit of chipped detail on them. And on the side, they seem to have the character logos. We can also see these logos on the pillars being Mario, Peach, Luigi, Daisy, Toad, and Yoshi. Funnily enough, they didn't include Koopa or Dry Bones, even though Dry Bones is definitely a desert level enemy. But I guess he's not one of the good guys technically, so he might not fit on this podium of good guy logos. We also have this area where the bats spawn out of. And again, just like Wario's Gold Mine, these are just 2D textured bats, not 3D modeled. And although they do a really good job at making them seem 3D, they are not. I'm sure that does save a lot of processing power. And it doesn't really need to be done any other way, considering that I would have never noticed they were just 2D models. We can see both where they enter from and where they exit from here. And to be honest, these guys spawn in perfectly, but once you go to the other side here, you can see that it takes a little bit of time for them to perfectly despawn. They fly a little bit deeper than the actual hole here, which is funny to see. Finally, I wanted to take a quick look at Thwomp Desert as well. There is not too much detail here, but I did have a few suggestions and a few people that wanted to see it. Obviously, we have the ginormous Thwomp in the middle, whose face changes once he's about to slam down and create this ginormous sand tidal wave. And taking a look at it from underneath is kind of interesting. Obviously it's not modeled from the bottom, as it wouldn't need to be, but you can sort of see the ripples when you're at the perfect angle. Another detail is that there are these little thwomps that have actually sunk deep into the sand, and they are fully modeled. At least the ones on the course. And I guess that there was a slight possibility that enough of these thwomps could be exposed where you'd be able to see a good amount of it, so they'd rather be safe than sorry and just model the whole thing. But interestingly, the ones in the distance actually are not modeled all the way. You can see that underneath, the ones in the distance are actually missing some ridges. They're not fully modeled and definitely do save a little bit of storage. But honestly, for a course this mundane and empty, it really wouldn't matter if they used full models or not, in my opinion. But again, who's to say? I didn't work on the actual development of this game, so I'll never really know how much of a difference it did make. We also have these cute little cactus models in the distance as well, and these are fully modeled, although they are modeled in a very unique way. At first glance, you might think the entire thing is just a bunch of 2D face textures, but no, the only thing that's really a 2D texture is the actual thorns, which makes sense, they wanted to be as flat and sharp as possible. But the rest of the bulbs of the cactuses are actually 3D modeled. It's an interesting way they went about it, and this might be a little bit intensive, so maybe that's why they had to cut out the bottom of the thwomps in the distance. In today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at King Boo and Rosalina's models and courses. These two have some pretty cool courses associated with their styles, so let's hop right into it. First, we're going to take a look at King Boo's model, and this is a very simple model. It's got to be one of the most simplistic models in the game. It only sits at 679 tries and 1066 edges. Now, right away, you can obviously tell that this is just a ginormous sphere with a few details here and there, being the face, arms, crown, and tail. But we can take a look at the mouth right now right away, and take a look at the teeth. Now, the teeth actually aren't super sharp. I imagine that they would have come to more of a point, and I guess technically they do, but it's a very dull point at that. As you can see, they do have pyramid points at the end, but the majority of the teeth kind of look pretty rounded actually and aren't super intense, which is pretty good. In some of the earlier renditions of Boo's model, they definitely had some very sharp teeth, and the internals of his mouth and tongue are also very slimmed down. Not too many polys were needed to convey an open mouth here, and it works for this character. We also have his crown here, and unlike all the other crowns from the princess models here, this one actually has 5 spires. It has the classic blue and red gemstones embedded in the crown. It also has these sort of diamond-shaped little nodules at the top of the crown. I don't know what these are officially called, but they're almost not even connected at all, just barely connecting by the tip of the crown and the bottom tip of the diamond nodule. If this was a real crown, you could probably flick this off with your finger. That's how little attachment this thing has. He also has arms and a tail that are very seldomly detailed. Obviously, since he's a ghost, he doesn't have any fingers, but they do use quite a few polys at the tip of the hand, as you can see here, and they have to make it seem pretty rounded. It's not an abundance, but it is enough to give it that rounded look. The tail uses far less polys, however, and is the only other real detail that comes out of this guy, but I do think it's an appropriate amount of polys for this model. Obviously, this guy doesn't have any legs, and other than that is pretty much just a simple rounded ghost model, so we can immediately take a look at his low poly model here. And something that's immediately interesting is that it does retain a very good roundness to it, and I mean, it really does have to since this model is pretty simple already, but with the few amount of polys that it uses, it does represent that rounded King Boo look. Unlike his full model's teeth, he actually does have some pretty sharp teeth on this model. These are just flat planed teeth that go a little bit deeper into his skull, and his tongue seems to be a little bit more recessed into his mouth than his previous model. His crown is also significantly scaled down and is missing the nodules that the first model had. But something funny about the crown is that it actually sinks all the way down into the Boo's head. As you can see, there's these white bits on the outside that connect to the bottom of the crown, but as you go to the inside of the actual King Boo model here, you can see it's this ginormous spike that actually has more crown texturing as we go down it. This would be literally impossible to see in the game, so I don't blame them for having this, and I'm sure it does save a little bit of poly work somehow. I'm not a game dev, so if there is one watching, please comment down below why this might be more efficient than just cutting the crown off entirely right under the skull. But it is definitely interesting to see. We can also again see the teeth that go a little bit into the skull model here, and the arms as well that actually go into the model as well. Unlike the crown though, they don't tip off into a pyramid-like structure or a sharp dagger. They just immediately get cut off and are not modeled past the actual head. And unlike all the other low poly models, he doesn't have the triangular hands. They're actually pretty rounded, and I guess they can get away with it since there's so little that needs to be done on this model, and especially since he doesn't have any legs. But it is nice to see that finally one of the low poly models does not suffer from the very triangular hands and feet. Now we can move on to Ghost Valley, and if I'm being honest, this course is also very simplistic, just like Boo's model, but we do have a few things to take a look at. One of the things we can take a look at is the actual course pillars here. Now normally you wouldn't really be able to see this because of the way they made it. It seems like they just go on infinitely into the void, but once you take a look from underneath, you can see that they're actually pretty short. It doesn't take too long before these guys are completely cut off by the blackness, but from this view you can see really just how short these guys are. We can also take a look at the background here, and it's a very ghost-like, Twilight-esque background they used for this course. The sky is very gloomy and dark, but not exactly pitch black, while the castles and the forest, or what I assume to be castles and forests, it's a little hard to tell, are underneath completely blacked out. We also have these 2D sprites here of the normal non-King Boos that sort of bob around and appear and disappear out of thin air. These guys are pretty pixelated and low res once you get up close, but when you're playing this course, it really doesn't matter, especially on the native resolution of the Wii console. But we can definitely see just how low res these guys really are in person. We can also take one aerial view and look at the course from a very far distance, and as you can see, the shaders they use on this course make it so that anything that's super far out of the distance turns to this dark bluish color and sort of fades it out entirely. But since this course was derived from the SNES, it's not very detailed and there's not too much to look at, so we can move on immediately to a bonus course here for Boo, which is the DS Battle Course Twilight House that reappears in Mario Kart Wii. The first thing I want to admire up close is just some of the decals and details used to really accentuate this course, like these piranha plant billboards or trimmings here with the heart in the middle. And the way that the piranha plants are actually formatted, it kind of makes it seem like they're in the shape of a heart as well. We also have these shine sprites on the building here, some on the gate, which are very low resolution and completely blacked out, only showcasing the minimal amount of detail that was needed to really express that it is a shine sprite. And we also have these ones above the doorway that are a little bit higher in definition, but not by much. These guys are mostly browned out as well, but they do have the glowing yellow eyes and the red background of the medallion, so it does add that extra little piece of detail that the original sprites definitely did not have. We also have this ginormous section of the house here, which cannot be accessed from the actual battle course, but taking a look from the inside does actually have a floor model. The ceiling and walls are not textured, but the floor is textured and modeled. Now, this originally would have led me to believe that at one point you could drive through this, but since this was based off of the actual DS course, they already had prior inspiration for the course, and that meant that they knew that there was no interior to the main part. The only reason I can think of as to why they would have added this is maybe to save on some polys. Since this is a ginormous flat platform, they could probably get away with just a few triangles to make up the entire base of this house. But I would assume to save a little bit of data if this course needed it, they could have just blacked it out or grayed it out or whatever they wanted to do, but no, it is fully textured as well. We can also take a look at the underside of the floor here, and like previously stated, it is not textured. It is completely blacked out, which makes sense and does save data. It is just a straightforward, shadowed out, or blacked out in this case, platform with 4 distinct pillars. We can also take a look at what's on the floor, which is a bunch of trees, big and small, and the actual floor being a treetop texture gradient. Taking a look at the inside of these trees, these stumps are modeled all the way up, even in the parts that are hidden by the actual leaves of the trees. And I can only imagine the reason they kept it in is to save a little bit of time at the expense of some data loss here. The walled background also consists of some more blacked out trees with a gradient red to blue sky pattern. Now we can take a look at Rosalina's models. She has 2 models like all the other princesses did, one being her biker uniform and the other being her standard dress uniform. The biker uniform sits at 1,051 tries and 1,623 edges, while the dress only sits at 915 tries and 1,409 edges. You'll also notice the Luma in the center here, and that model sits at 100 tries and 150 edges. A very simplistic model, and it's got to be one of the most simplistic character-esque models in the game. Now, just like Peach and Daisy, Rosalina has a 4-spire crown with the red and blue gemstones embedded in it. Not as highly detailed as King Boo's though. Instead of a normal gold crown, this is the only character that has the gray crown, or silver crown, depending on what material it's made from. And she has these very interesting star earrings. They are very sharp models, but perfectly fit her character. She also has the star emblem on her chest that is more reminiscent to a Luma star than a standard star, and has the gold embedded gem, which again is the classic Luma color. Now, what's interesting about Rosalina is she did not appear in Double Dash, so they didn't just reuse her old model like they did for Peach and Daisy in Mario Kart Wii. No, they had to create a whole new character model. That being said, she does retain the exact same stylistic properties as the other Peach and Daisy models, like the very sharp, pyramid-esque heels, the dress concave, and the very low poly-utilized dress all the way up to the chest. The cuffs of her dress at her arms also have these little furls too that the other princesses didn't have, but totally makes sense in the stylistic properties of Rosalina. Both her biker and her dress model share the exact same head, hair, crown, and earring models, so there isn't much deviation there. We can also take a quick look at the Luma model, and although this is even simpler than the Boo model, there is a tiny bit of detail to look at, like the little curl at the top spire of the star, the cute but quite conservative rotundness of the Luma, and the stubby little legs. The details on her eyes are very low resolution as well, being only made up of about 50 pixels per eye, and the backside having absolutely no detail whatsoever. We can also take a look at the low poly Rosalina models, and these ones don't come with a Luma, as you'd be too far to even see it at that point. But just like the main models, these models share the exact same head and crown models, however the hair is actually a little bit different, solely in positioning that is, and I'm sure they are pretty similar in tri-count, but the biker Rosalina's model has hair that sticks back a little bit, while the standard Rosalina has the normal Rosalina hair. Interestingly, unlike Peach and Daisy who didn't have neck models, Rosalina's dress model actually does have a neck, and if we take a look from the bottom here too, we can see just how deep the neck model goes, and it's pretty far. Just like King Boo's crown, this one goes pretty deep into the low poly model itself. It does sort of make sense in this essence, as Peach and Daisy's dress models had more of a collar around the neck which hid the absence of the neck, while Rosalina's dress goes all the way down to her shoulders, so it would be pretty apparent if it was missing its neck. However, the biker Rosalina's model is missing the neck, so we're back to square one on this model. And something I never pointed out on the previous princess models, I don't think, is the little low poly scarf here as well, simply made up of one try, but it is a funny little detail that does really tie the character together. And speaking of back to square one, we also have the triangular hands and feet again. However, Rosalina's dress model does have the very furled out sleeve models again, and although they are pretty low poly, they're still well detailed. I do also want to take a look at Rosalina's dress feet models too, and these are very stubby and funny to look at. Now up next we have Moonview Highway, which is an amazing visual course. There are a lot of secrets in this one as well, so I'm happy to talk about this one. The first thing I want to look at though is the vehicles in this course, and not the ones that you drive, the ones that act as obstacles in this course. You can see the second that they spawn out of range and can no longer be seen, and they're very quick to spawn them out, I'll say. Immediately as it passes the original frame of view, they just completely disappear. The same goes for their spawn in as well. However, they do travel quite a bit of ways before they actually despawn when they're in front of you. We also have this bridge here, which utilizes a reflection model that we've seen on Sherbert Land, where they just make and mirror the model upside down underneath the water. Something interesting though about this mirrored model is it doesn't have any of the actual lights that are on the bridge, nor the structural ropes. So that's pretty interesting to see. I mean, I guess you could see this in the course if you fell off the bridge here, but it is strange that they did decide to omit that detail when it's something that could easily be seen. As well as the bridge, the landscape and the moon are also mirrored. As you can see in the distance here, there are two separate moon sprites and two different models for the actual mountain plains. We can also go into the main part of the city now and take a look at all of the billboards that line the actual sides of the course, such as the Mushroom Moon, the musical. Now, as you can see on the billboard, there's actually a Petey Piranha acting as sort of a King Kong on the Empire State Building, which is funny to see. I never actually noticed this while playing the game, but this is definitely something that someone who's looking really close at this billboard could have definitely seen. Apparently, this is also starring Mario, Peach, and Yoshi, so it's funny that in their spare time, they have enough time to actually act out a complete musical. We also have other billboards like King of Speed and Moon Bank, and this very interesting green fuel billboard that again I never noticed while playing the game. It has these little Mario sprites that are going back and forth between these very close together pipes. It is also surrounded by these question blocks as well. I do like this billboard, and it's funny that I was never able to see this when playing normally considering the amount of times I've actually played this course. We also have other ones like Gold Star Bank, another green fuel one that says Light Your Life, and a Tropical Mart billboard. We also have some signs above the actual course as well, stating Caution, Danger, and Night 90. Now, I don't know if this is the name of the road or a speed limit. It's hard to say. We also have this highway portion that goes over the actual course that is never driven on. And interestingly, once you go to the end of it here at this mountain, it actually abruptly ends and doesn't phase into the mountain at all. It's weird that it just cuts off before actually clipping into the mountain, considering it wouldn't have made a difference either way. I'm sure the data saved is very minimal. And if you're paying really close attention, you actually can see that it cuts off before the mountain if you're driving the course. Next time you're doing a time trial on this course, try to check it out yourself. And now that you know that it's not attached to the mountain, it's pretty obvious to see. We also have the beautiful buildings here that we haven't quite taken a look at yet. And from the back, they are mostly not modeled in places you wouldn't be able to see them. However, these ones on the corner do seem to have some modeling in places that might not be necessary, considering you wouldn't be able to see it from that angle. Something else that's interesting is these sprites of the roofs here. It looks like very stretched window sprites on some of these roofs, or maybe they're road textures, who's to say, but it's funny that they decided to model and texture the roofs when you're not ever going to see them, and if you did see them, you'd see a very terrible texture job done. Especially for this one that's maybe supposed to represent the Empire State Building. The roof is actually just more window textures. I don't know why they didn't decide to just omit that entirely, but I guess for some reason they decided that crappy window textures would make for a better roof than nothing at all. One last aerial view of this course just illustrates how compact but beautiful this course really is. It perfectly captures that city lifestyle and is one of my favorite courses in Mario Kart Wii entirely. They did a really good job on this one. Now finally, we have what some would consider the hardest course in Mario Kart Wii, Rainbow Road. This is a very beautiful course and has a ton of detail. Now, a little secret that I've had this whole time is that I have a code in my emulator that puts the time and the item slots right behind the actual camera as to not interfere with any of the actual visuals. But for some reason on this course, the backgrounds don't actually overlay on top of the actual items. And that's not because the code's working. As you can see in some portions here, the actual time goes underneath the model still, but not behind the actual sky textures. So that's just something that I thought was interesting to point out. We also have the start of the course here, the Mario Kart logo in beautiful rainbow textures, fully 3D modeled, and not just a 2D texture printed on a billboard or something. It's also accompanied by these stars that are sort of strangely textured. I don't know why they went for a brick-like texture on these stars, but I guess that was just a personal design choice. We also have these star bits that flow over this waving portion of the course. Some of these star bits actually have some pretty good detail, being pretty sharp and true to the actual Super Mario Galaxy star bits, while others are more diamond-shaped, very simplistic, and although they are textured, there isn't too much detail that goes into them. We also have some in the distance as well that are just 2D textures that sit in the sky, never moving, and from the back are not textured at all. Now these ones are pretty far from the course, so I guess it really wouldn't matter if they were modeled versus textured, and I never noticed it myself until getting up this close. So I guess it did the job it needed to do. We also have these planets in the background here, like Saturn, which is a very low definition version of Saturn, and also has some secret stars hidden in the actual planet itself. The moon, which is probably borrowed from Moonview Highway, and is also not textured from the back. And obviously the biggest planet of all, which is the Earth. Now for the most part, what's interesting is this course actually takes place over North America, specifically more Canada than any other country. We can take a look all around the Earth, and a lot of the European countries are modeled. We also have Russia, China, and importantly, Japan. Now obviously they weren't going to omit Japan from the Earth since it is a very crucial part of Nintendo, so it is right there. However, Africa is completely omitted and is not modeled at all on this Earth. Neither is Australia. We can take a look at this figure 8 section of the course here, and as you can see, the texture stretching is very uncomfortable. And on top of that, there is also this one section right here that is entirely missing its texturing. This has got to be an error of some sort and was probably not intended. I mean, if they were going to model the bottom of the rest of it, why leave out a quarter of the texturing? That doesn't make sense to me, and that's what leads me to think that this was just an error on their part and not an actual design choice to save data. What's funny is the texture stretching only really appears on the underside of the figure 8 here, and under the majority of the course is actually pretty decently textured and not too uncomfortable. We also have this giant galaxy or nebula in the distance here, which is very beautifully detailed and really adds that extra pizzazz to this course that it really needed. This has got to be one of the largest courses overall, I have to imagine. Maybe not in poly count, but in sheer size alone. As you can see from an aerial view just how large this whole entire area is, it makes the course look like a cliff note on this ginormous planetary solar system. Today is the final episode of our Mario Kart Expose series. We're going to be taking a look at Bowser's models and courses. There are a lot of cool things to look at in this episode, and it is going to be a great way to end the series, so let's get started right away. We're gonna get started by taking a look at Bowser and Dry Bowser's models. Bowser's model sits at 855 tries and 1,368 edges, while Dry Bowser sits at 970 tries and 2,905 edges, so over double the amount of edges while only having a few more tries. The reason I think this is because of the way Dry Bowser's model is structured. Unlike Bowser, who's got very flat and flush limbs, Dry Bowser's bones are modeled independently and give a lot more space for edges. When we take a look at his arms and legs, you can see the spacing where the bones actually overlap and intersect the model. This obviously makes sense with the model as it's supposed to be Bowser's skeleton, but it's also understandable as to why they would have more edges since there's less tries or faces meeting up with each other. One big key difference though is definitely the shape of Dry Bowser's skull comparing it to Bowser's actual head. His nose is a lot more rotund and protrudes a little bit further than I think Bowser's does, which doesn't make sense considering the bone would be underneath the actual skin of Bowser's original model. And the same goes for his eyebrows too. They seem to protrude a lot further than the actual Bowser model itself. Bowser's normal model has these bushy eyebrows, which obviously would not have any skeleton holding onto them, where the part of the skull where his eyebrows should be on Dry Bowser are a lot larger. Although Bowser and Dry Bowser have almost exactly the same horns, if not exactly the same, his hair model is completely different. Bowser's hair slicks back and goes a lot further down the skull than Dry Bowser's, where Dry Bowser's is more of a tied up ponytail with 4 protruding pieces of hair. We can take a look at the back of these shells too, and these are amazingly done. I love looking at these guys, and as a kid I always thought these were the best part of Bowser's model. You can see the individual segments with the molten essence in between Dry Bowser's turtle shell, and Bowser himself also has similar segments, although he's a lot more full and doesn't have any of the actual magma essence coming out, obviously. But they are pretty consistent. I mean, they look exactly the same size, it looks like they've used the same amount of tries, and the spines all line up, aside from maybe a little bit of misalignment. We can take a look at Dry Bowser's tail too, and he has that classic Mario skeleton floating property of the bones. Obviously, they're not connected at all, and you can see the space in between the model, and this is intentional, obviously, as it's supposed to illustrate the separation of the actual skeleton that I imagine every vertebrate would have. And it does make sense in the Mario world. If you remember Dry Bones from any of his games, he has the magical property of bringing his head back to his body after he's been stomped by Mario. Interestingly though, the spikes on Dry Bowser's tail are only made up of about 3 polys, where Bowser's spikes are actually made up of 4. It's just an interesting observation, and I wonder why they went that route. Maybe to save on a little bit of data, but would one more try really have made a difference in the grand scheme of things? Probably not. We can also take a look at the low poly models too, and these are very silly models. For the most part, his mouth is always open, but on this model specifically, it really stands out like a sore thumb. A lot of the other details too, like his hair, are only made of about a few tries, and his teeth are just simple flat planes. He's got those big bulky arms with very stretched and low definition textures for the actual cuffs that sit on Bowser's arms, and the same goes for Dry Bowser as well. We can also take a look at the shells, and there is a huge difference in between these guys. The directions of the spines are a lot more different than on the previous version of these models. They're heading in different directions, they're rotated the wrong way, and it's just very silly the way they went about this. Dry Bowser does retain that sectioned off magma essence in between his shell, where Bowser's is actually just almost a flat green plane. It's a very funny shell model, but even though it is very low definition, I still do appreciate it. Now we can take a look at Bowser's castle, and the first thing I want to look at is the surrounding walls of the entrance of the castle. When I was playing this, I always thought that it was a lot more grandiose than it truly is. As we can see from a bird's eye view, the castle walls are actually just 2D textures in between these little castle columns. You can see right in between into the inside of the actual castle. And right before the entrance, we have these little banners that have Bowser's classic icon on it, with a special cup text above and below the actual icon that I never noticed before. Maybe I wasn't paying close enough attention, or maybe the native resolution on the Wii just wasn't enough for me to make it out. But it is obviously there now that I'm taking a look at it. We also have Bowser's head that actually acts as the doorway to the castle here. And taking a look from above, you can see that there's, again, some missing areas where you can see right into the actual interior of the castle. But if we take a look at the inside of Bowser, you can actually see that the eyebrows and the mouth are modeled from the back. The mouth makes perfect sense, as you're actually driving through the mouth to enter the castle. But the eyebrows, those are actually right against Bowser's head, so there's no way you'd ever be able to see behind the eyebrows. So it's funny that they didn't choose to optimize this whatsoever. As we go through Bowser's castle, we take a look at the waving platforms here, and make our way through a couple turns to end up at this area right here, with a grand opening that showcases a bunch of lava and some castle debris. Now what's interesting about lava textures and water textures in this game is they generally stretch well beyond the course bounds and are generally just made up of a simple 2-try plane, to save on data of course, and they're just textured over. But with this lava pool, there's actually a small section that's missing a little bit of the lava. As you can see here, right beyond the actual visible scope of the course, there's this piece of castle that sits right over top of the lava, and right underneath it is a black void that doesn't have any lava in it whatsoever. We can take a look at the other castles here too and see that it's not the same for all the other castles, regardless of if it's modeled over top of the lava or not. So it's funny to see. So I wonder if it was actually even a good idea to go ahead and do this, or if it actually takes up more data and tries to delete this little patch here. Who knows? We can keep going through the course up to this half-pipe section where there's something seemingly missing, and that is the ginormous Bowser statue that shoots the fireball obstacles. But the second we load in, we can take a look at this beautiful model right here. And although this model might be based off of Bowser, we can take a look and see that the actual details of this model are a lot sharper and a lot more low poly than Bowser's normal model. Take for instance the shell. There's far less polys being used on both the actual face of the shell and the spikes. Bowser's standard model has about 4 tries per spike, where this one only has about 3. It's a lot more rigid as well, and if we take a look at the back of the shell, you can see that it is fully textured and modeled. You can see a little bit of it poking out, so I'm sure that it saves just a little bit of data to do the whole thing and texture over it. But now that we can take a look beneath the actual model, we can definitely see that there is some detail that's hidden beyond the scope of view. We can also take a look at his fireballs too and see the exact moment where they would spawn out. As you can see here, right as they pass by the actual player character, they just completely despawn since they're no longer in the field of view. All the elements in this course do the same, like these little fire elements here with the 2D faced fireballs that we've taken a look at in other episodes, and also the thwomps that are spread out throughout the course. Now as we pass by this beautiful Showtime billboard, we can take a look at the landscape of this course, and it is made up of about 3 different textured planes. The first is this brush of dead forest, a bunch of trees with absolutely no leaves, probably being scorched by the constant flow of lava surrounding it. The second is a range of shorter mountains, and the third is the high range mountains that give a little bit of extra depth to the course. We can also take a look at the sky model really quickly too, and this is a very beautiful sky, one of the most beautiful in the game, I must say. It reminds me a lot of the Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess or even Super Smash Bros. Brawl, specifically the Subspace Emissary storyline. It is a beautiful, dark, crimson red that provides a very nice haunting aura. Up next, we can move on to Bowser's Castle for the Game Boy Advance. Now, this is a very simple course, I'm going to be honest, so there's not too much to take a look at. But one of the things we can take a look at is these little fireballs here. Now, these guys pop out of the lava when you pass by this little jumping section to try to hinder your race and make you fall in the lava. And as we take a look at them, below the actual lava, they don't despawn. They're always constantly rendered in as long as they're in the field of view. And they just bob slowly up and down, waiting for their moment to strike back out of the lava. If I had to take a guess, I would have thought that they would have despawn them until there was a moment where they needed to pop out of the lava, but maybe it was easier to just model it in like this. And since this course has so little detail, I'm sure it really doesn't make a difference at all. We can also take a look at the background castles here. We have these ginormous castle columns with the Bowser logo on them, with a wall surrounding the entirety of the course. Behind them, we also have some smaller detailed castles, which add a little bit of extra depth to this course as well. And we also have these storm clouds that constantly shoot out this lightning. And interestingly, the lightning's actually on the exact same plane as the clouds. I know in some other courses they might have put this in front, but for some reason they decided to keep it on the exact same plane. We also have this really low definition, low detail mountain range in the back that doesn't add much if I'm being honest, and definitely could have had a little bit more detail put into it. We can also take one aerial look at this course too, just to see the actual dome in which it's contained, and the ceiling is honestly pretty low compared to where the course is. Maybe it just seems like that because of how wide the actual circumference of this course is, but it does seem very low comparatively. Next, we can take a look at Bowser's son, Bowser Jr., and this model sits at 792 tries and 1,242 edges. So although it's much smaller than Bowser, it's pretty close to the amount of tries and edges used on Bowser. This is a very cute yet menacing model. He's got his little bushy red eyebrows and these small cute little horns on his head that are not yet fully developed. His actual snout and mouth do not have nearly as much detail, and they're a lot more rounded off than Bowser or Dry Bowser's models were. And we can also take a look at this bib. Now this bib is used to put over his face to make him appear more menacing in some games. And as we take a look at the back, you can see the little tie off of it as well. While we're at the back, the shell model is very cute and small. It's a very compact but robust model. Instead of the normal 12 spines on Bowser's shell, Bowser Jr. only has 7. As he's still in development, he hasn't gained the extra 3 that'll, I assume, come in maybe later on in his life. And like Bowser, he also has some cuffs on his arms, although these cuffs do not have any spiked detail on them, where Bowser's did. And something else that's not spiked is his actual tail. I guess those also come in a little bit later in his life too, but as we can see now, there is no spikes. We can also take a look at his low poly model, and this model is just pitiful. I mean, take a look at his head. His head looks super goofy and slimmed down, although maybe it is a little bit more aerodynamic. His hair is also very blocky and diamond-esque, not very well done, and it looks like his horns have been cut in half as well. The cuffs on his arms are these ginormous bulky triangles. I feel like they could have maybe added a few more tries to make this into a perfect square and maybe reduce the bulkiness of it, but I guess they decided that you would be too far away to even notice the detail. He still has his bib, and although it is low definition, you can still make out the menacing little mouth that it has painted on it, and his shell also does retain the detail that is necessary. Funnily enough, the spines on his shell are actually made up of 4 polys, where the low poly Bowser and Dry Bowser models only had 3 poly spines. Now we can take a look at N64 Bowser's Castle, and this is a beautiful course. I love this course, and it was really well done in the remake. The first thing we have to look at is obviously this Bowser statue that starts off the course with a nice element of surprise. It blasts out this 2D fire sprite here that acts as a tiny obstacle, but it's a little bit too far back to really affect anyone realistically. When you're not in view, the statue obviously despawns to save on data, but since it spawned in, we're gonna take a good look at this bad boy. If I had to take a guess, it's probably the same exact model that was used for the Bowser statue in the normal Bowser's Castle, but just retextured and frozen in place instead of having any articulation. We can take a look at this swamp alley as well and see Marty sitting behind the cage. Now Marty never really wakes up and has always been behind this cage for probably about 18 or some odd years now, but as we take a look from the inside of the cage, it seems that Marty would not even know that he's behind bars, as they're not textured from behind. They're completely invisible from this angle and cannot be seen at all, so maybe Marty doesn't even know of his fate. And since thwomps only seem to have an up-down motion for the most part. Maybe he doesn't even have the ability to get out of the cage. Although there are some thwomps that have a little bit more range of motion, I can assume that it's more likely that Marty doesn't have that range of motion. Otherwise, he'd probably escape by now. We can also take a look at these Bowser paintings real quick, and obviously from behind, they are not modeled, but interestingly, from behind you can actually still see the glowing effect of the paintings. It's interesting that these were textured from the front and behind, but there have been other examples in other courses we've taken a look at where the light models do have that front and back texture. As we take a look at the course, most of the walls that you're not able to see are not textured from behind, but some elements of the castle that you can't see are textured all the way around, like these corner columns here. Even when they're out of sight, they didn't decide to get rid of any of the actual texturing or modeling done on these bad boys. Specifically, this one in the corner has a little bit removed, so it showcases that they did have the ability to remove it. They just chose not to on a lot of them. Another funny detail is the roofs of these are actually modeled too, and there's never a moment where we really see these roofs, I don't believe. But my guess is maybe they had a version of the preview camera which hovered over the actual Bowser's Castle models and showcased the roof of these bad boys. Taking a look around the actual course model here, it's a little sad to see that there is no outside detail, even though you'd never be able to see it normally. I just wish for myself personally that there was a little bit more of a castle here than just the layout of a course. Funnily enough, the course also hovers above the lava too, so it breaks all the actual laws of physics here and doesn't have really any supports past the original castle entrance. Taking a faraway bird's eye view too, we can see that this course is actually contained in just a hexagon. It's not circular at all, and is very rudimentary on the amount of actual exterior polys used. I can imagine the walls of this course only make up about 12 polys, which is pretty interesting actually. I know this course is pretty heavily detailed, so that does make sense. And even as we take a look at the exterior borders from the actual course, it's almost impossible to distinguish the corners. They did a really good job on this, and it proves that a hexagon really did do the job. Finally, I had a course suggestion from someone in the comments of the last Rosalina and Boo video suggesting I take a look at Galaxy Coliseum. I never even knew about this course beforehand, so thank you for your suggestion. I managed to get a code that brought this into the game and made it so it was possible to take a look at. This course is basically a flat circular plane with a little spinning top point underneath the course. Now this is obviously for the main boss here, which is the spinner from Mario Galaxy. In this tournament mode, you would have tried to use mushrooms to knock this bad boy off before the time ended or the rings of the course just fell off entirely. Now this mode was never introduced in the game, so it's interesting to see what we really lost. Taking a look underneath the course, you can actually see there's these weird spheres that circle around the actual perimeter of the course. There's 3 different layers of this actual circle that have these spheres in them. And as we get closer and closer to the center, each variation of these spheres tend to go a little bit slower, until we get to the center, where the actual spheres in the center are a little bit transparent. As you can see, there's 3 of them that continuously go in this circle right in the center here, and they don't have the exact same opacity as these standard spheres in the outer and center ring. Out in the distance, we can see some star bits, and they didn't do a lazy 2D texture like they did in Rainbow Road. They actually modeled all of these star bits and placed them around the course. Although they are just little diamonds and they're not super high detailed, it is interesting to see that the backs of these star bits are modeled and they're not just simple flat planes. I guess it makes sense since there's almost no detail in this course whatsoever, but I am grateful for it. As we take a look beneath the course too, we have what seem to be little bone fragments from some unknown monster. These bone fragments are ginormous, and the way they're structured, they seem to have these bumps and ridges on them that would indicate to me arm or leg bones, but I could be entirely wrong and they could be just pieces of a planet or a certain type of rock. It's hard to say. These bones go well beneath the course line too. As you can see, I'm well past the actual starry sky and the bones are still going, so that's very interesting to see. Other than that, that's all we really have to look at in Mario Kart Wii. I really hope you enjoyed this series, and it was a lot of fun for me to make it. I know there might be a few people that are sad to see it end, but don't worry, there's a lot more Mario Kart to look at. We even have a ton of modded courses to look at in Mario Kart Wii, so we'll eventually get to those as well. Other than that, if you did like this video or this series, leave a like and hit that subscribe button, and tell me in the comments below if you actually like the future video ideas. Other than that, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.